Hey, everybody. Welcome. Glad that you are here tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night chat. Good to have you with us. Let's get into it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad that you are with us here tonight. Yet another great late night conversation. Now, if you want to ask a question, the best way to send a question, we take questions. Questions can be sent via Rumble Rant if you're watching on Rumble, or Cash App, Caleb Maupin 22. And that's the way questions can be sent. Hopefully we're remonetized on YouTube soon. But yeah, that's the way we are taking questions at the moment. And the way this works, first I give my opening remarks, which is whatever I want to talk about for tonight. Then from there, we do a roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. Then from there, I answer your questions, and it is you all's questions that make the second half of the show what it is, that make it exciting, make it fun, etc. So glad that you all are here. We're an hour later than usual, but we're still here, and I am streaming as much as I can. Was sick a couple for last week or whatever, and so now I am trying to catch up and stream more because I am now back. So I appreciate all of you. I'm glad you all are here. Couple announcements. The main announcement is coming up in Chicago, July 12th is going to be the Center for Political Innovation's National Convention. Will be the biggest event that we have ever done. It's going to be quite phenomenal. So I really hope that you can be there. If there's one event that you come to this year, make it this one. We are doing some really important outreach, and I've been having a lot of busy days, making a lot of phone calls and dealing with this aspect of it and that aspect of it. And, one thing here, one thing there, but we are gradually marching toward achieving our very successful event in July. So I really hope that you will be there. It's going to be great. I am headed out to Los Angeles, May 24th. That's coming up later this month. So if you are in the LA area, we're having a small get together, just a small workshop in the LA area. Those small workshops are fun. So I'd love to meet a lot of the California-based people that are part of our community here. So keep that in mind. As I said before, questions can be sent via Rumble Rants on the Rumble, or you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22. And the way this works, first the opening remarks, then followed by the roll call. Then after that, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if there's something you would like me to touch on in the second half of the program, all you need to do is send me a Rumble rant or send me a super chat. Either one of those works. There you go. So yeah, thanks everybody for being here. We're just going to get right into it. The first thing that I would like to talk about for tonight is that this is the anniversary of the Odessa massacre, which was a really, really tragic and horrendous event that happened in 2014 in the aftermath of the Euromaidan coup that violently overthrew the Ukrainian government. There was a gathering of people that opposed the extremist Ukrainian nationalist forces that took control of the Ukrainian government. And they gathered in the Odessa House of Trade Unions. And the trade union building was lit on fire. As people jumped out of the building to escape the flames, they were beaten to death with baseball bats. What the Ukrainian far-right extremists did, massacring civilians in the House of Trade Unions in Odessa. Look into the details of it. It's an absolutely horrendous event, utterly horrendous, that basically people were burned alive and murdered by the forces the USA is now arming in Ukraine. And the forces that the USA is backing in Ukraine committed this horrendous atrocity. And the details of the Odessa massacre, the massacre in the House of Trade Unions that happened in 2014, are utterly horrendous. And they were shown to the world by RT. Western media blotted them out and covered them up. I've even seen some socialist groups try to cover up what happened, but they're really, really horrendous. And it shows you that these forces that are tearing down the World War II memorial, they're just horrendous. And it's really crazy that the left, the so-called left, are the biggest supporters of these far-right Nazi admiring forces in Ukraine. The very same people that call everyone a Nazi, that think there's a Nazi under every rock. You're a Nazi, I'm a Nazi, we're all Nazis. If you disagree with that, you're a Nazi. You disagree with this, you're a Nazi. Everyone's a Nazi except for the actual Nazis in Ukraine. It's really wild. Jimmy Dore's a Nazi because he wants, forced the vote on healthcare. And I'm a Nazi because I wrote a book criticizing Israel. And, Lenin's a Nazi because, imperialist finance capital is code for Jew. And everyone's a Nazi except for like the actual Nazis, the people that are actually tearing down World War II memorials, the people that are actually, admiring and having torchlit marches for Stepan Bandera. It's this weird blind spot that liberals have. And it just shows you that at the end of the day, it's just about a bigger platform. Cancel culture is selective, right? Someone can be canceled as a Nazi because they make a hand gesture. But yet the US government can fund actual Nazis and get away with it. And none of the big social media influencers, none of them attack them. And social media is rigged. And I'm not interested in building a social media movement. And social media is fake. Social media is rigged. Do not believe anything you see on social media. Get involved in a real organization. The only reason I am right here streaming is because I'm communicating with you. If you're watching this, you're part of our community. And to some degree or other, you're engaging with our ideas. And I'm on here to engage with you, to talk with you, to have back and forth with you. But I'm not trying to get famous on social media. And I'm also not trying to use social media as the main way to build. When I said out of the movement to the masses, I also meant off the internet to the masses, because the internet is rigged, and that we have to just build a movement. And we have a dedicated group of people right now. CPI, Center for Political Innovation, has real energy right now, and stuff is happening, right? And door hanger flyers are going up on doors. And it's really exciting what's happening with CPI right now, but it's not on the internet. Some of the stuff we do here and there, we'll film it and put it up, but most of what we're doing is not on the internet and shouldn't be on the internet, right? We are not doing it to be seen, right? We're not posing. We are actually getting it done. And I'm quite excited. And, we need to just focus on the good things that are coming up while we remember horrendous events like the Odessa massacre, that if it wasn't for Russian media, and it wasn't for the people like me and others who've worked with Russian media, who worked, that no one would know that the US-backed forces committed these crimes. The Odessa massacre at the trade union house is really horrendous. And the fact that Wikipedia is edited to try and cover it up, the fact that, there's just so much, but you look at the details, just go look into the details for yourself about what happened at the Odessa House of Trade Unions. The details speak for themselves. And there's a reason that people like me are smeared and targeted. There's a reason that RT has been targeted and is illegal in many European countries. There's a reason that they don't want you to know the truth. Go and look into the details. Go and look into the details for yourself. The details of the Ukraine war, the reason that that Russia is right in Ukraine and that the USA is wrong is because they never will acknowledge the other side of the story. If Russia's arguments were not correct, they would acknowledge them and debunk them on television. They do not do that. CNN will never let you see this image that I have shown on these streams over and over and over again. In fact, they've banned the Wikipedia page of this image. This is the Alley of Angels. These are all the children that were killed by the US-backed regime in Kiev. The fanatical anti-Russian government installed by the Western European EU countries. That government that has been murdering children, and they don't want you to know about this. And they don't acknowledge this and say, yeah, but it was okay. No, they just don't want you to acknowledge this. They don't want you to know that Russia's had a military base in Crimea since the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, since, the 1800s, since the 1700s, they've had a military base there. They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know that there was an agreement, the Minsk agreement, to give the people of Donbass their right to speak their own language, to reintegrate them into the country, that Russia tried to bring the peoples of the Eastern republics back into Ukraine, and Ukraine didn't implement the agreement. They don't want you to know about the Minsk agreement and the Minsk Accords. They don't want you to know about the Odessa massacre that today is the 11-year anniversary of. They don't want you to know any of this. They won't acknowledge any of this because their story falls apart. The narrative that the war in Ukraine, like Kamala Harris said, it's just a big country attacking a small country. That narrative falls to shreds if you know anything about it. And the fact that they will not acknowledge the facts of it, they just stick to this big, mean Russia attacking little Ukraine, which is not what happened. It's big European Union, big NATO, big United States overthrowing Ukraine, turning Ukraine into a base to attack Russia, and starting to murder all the people in Ukraine that are culturally Russian and can sympathize with Russia, and Russia trying to negotiate a peace deal and giving 8 years for the peace deal to go into effect and finally moving in. They never want to tell you that side of the story, right? And if you bring that up, people are like, what? Like, people have never heard this before. They've never heard this before. It's never allowed to be part of the discourse. Well, if this argument was wrong, they would let it be part of the discourse and they would debunk it. They would say, well, this is what Russia says, but it's wrong because. They never do that. They never do that. All they say is Russia doesn't like NATO and they are afraid Ukraine is going to join NATO, and that's silly. And so that's all they'll say. They'll never acknowledge the murder of the children of Donbass. Right? They'll never acknowledge the Odessa massacre. They'll never acknowledge the Alley of Angels. They banned the Wikipedia of this. They never will acknowledge Russia's side of the story, because if they do, their story falls to shreds. Right? I mean, it's like a judge, like say there was a trial, right? And someone's on trial for murder, and their fingerprints are on the gun, and and the bullet in the victim, the ballistics lines up with the gun, and they have, they clearly did it, but then the judge won't allow any of that evidence to be entered in. And then, you're supposed to, convict the person. I mean, you can't convict them at that point. The smoking gun evidence is not being allowed. And the murder and the massacre in the House of Trade Unions, the Alley of Angels and the bombing of the people of Donetsk, the Minsk agreement that was ignored for 8 years that Russia facilitated. If Russia wanted to invade Ukraine, they would have invaded Ukraine. They wouldn't have figured out a peace negotiation to prevent this situation. They wouldn't have made an agreement to keep the republics in Ukraine but respect their rights. They wouldn't have facilitated that if they just wanted to invade. They don't ever talk about the Minsk agreements. They never talk about any of this. And as far as they're concerned, the whole story just sticks to Russia doesn't like NATO. Russia was afraid Ukraine might join NATO. So Russia, big mean Russia, attacked Ukraine and killed all these people. Feels so bad for them. And if you don't immediately just wave a Ukrainian flag, you're a bad person. And it's all fallen to shit. And most Americans are tired of this narrative. And they went to the polls in big numbers to vote for a presidential candidate who said, I don't care who wins in Ukraine. I just want the killing to stop. And Donald Trump was baited and threatened on that. Can't you say you want Ukraine to win? And he just wouldn't budge, because American public opinion isn't fooled by mainstream media. Many Americans, whether they be left or libertarian or right wing or whatever, many Americans just don't buy the argument that we should be letting our roads crumble and letting our bridges collapse and letting our power plants go to shit and letting our water treatment facilities fail and letting our living standards go down while we dump billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars into Ukraine. Just Americans just don't buy that argument. And you can sell it to them and you can tell them sob stories on CNN and you can do that all you want. But that doesn't change the reality. Americans are just not for this war. Now, the negotiations, right? Now, the negotiations between the United States and Iran and the negotiations between the United States and Ukraine. Here we go. I can only hope that some kind of resolution to the conflict in Ukraine comes soon. Right? I know we're coming up on Victory Day. These are important days in Russia. May 9th is Victory Day, in which they celebrate their heritage, defeating the Nazis. There's a big gathering planned in Moscow where many important world leaders are going to be there. Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un and Ibrahim Traore and many world leaders are going to be in Moscow to celebrate the victory over the Nazis in World War II. It's going to be a very important gathering. Russia would like to have a ceasefire, and J.D. Vance is coming out and saying the war in Ukraine is not going to end anytime soon. But then I guess there's going to be another 100 days of negotiations. And I honestly don't know what's going to happen. I know what public opinion in America is. And public opinion in America is end this war, stop aid to Ukraine. If the American people wanted this war to continue, they would have voted for Kamala Harris. They didn't. They voted for the guy who said, I don't care who wins. I just want the killing to stop, which is a completely defensible position that horrified CNN. What? Oh my God, you don't want Ukraine to win and Russia to lose? And no, I just want the killing to stop, which is a pretty reasonable position if you're looking at a war in which there's a huge body count and people are dying. Generally, wanting the war to stop and wanting both parties to cease hostilities is a defensible position. Me about mainstream media in any issue is when they don't argue, they just bait. Right? And that's whenever argument is done in the form of baiting, that's when you know you're not being told the whole story, right? Generally in mainstream media, right? If I were to go on CNN and say what I'm saying now, the response would be, are you actually saying Russia might be in the right? Oh my God. And they wouldn't have any argument against what I'm saying, but everybody knows Russia is bad, and they just rely on this bias. Everybody knows. Well, at one point, everybody knew the earth was flat. At one point, everybody knew that germs weren't caused by diseases. They were caused by wizards and witches and all kinds of things, right? At one point, everybody knew that Bill Cosby was an awesome guy that anyone would want to invite over and have their teenage daughter hang out with, right? There's a lot of things that everybody knows that have turned out not to be true. And actually, look at the election results that just happened and you look at the polls, everybody doesn't know it. Mainstream media acts like everybody knows it. But a lot of Americans are doing what you're doing right now and listening to podcasts and listening to YouTube channels and learning the other side of the story, and they don't buy it, right? And a lot of Americans don't buy it. Maybe at the beginning when there was just a huge thrust of anti-Russian propaganda, but after a few months, those Ukraine flags were gone and people got tired of the bullshit. And people are tired of the bullshit. Now, let's see. I would like to see Donald Trump end this war in Ukraine. I'd also like to see Donald Trump de-escalate with Iran. And I'm not thrilled that both of those negotiations seem to be where they're at. But I will say this, right? Both sides want to get the most out of the deal that they can, right? Donald Trump wants Russia to make as many concessions as possible. And Russia wants to, make sure that the people in the eastern regions and the new republics that have joined with Russia are as secure as they possibly can be. They don't want to just, give up all the territory they fought for and have people die in vain. So both sides, they have to be careful here. This is not a matter of, one side just wants to end it and the other side is being belligerent. These are serious issues. I mean, the main issue of contention is not Crimea, right? Crimea is part of Russia. There's a huge Russian military base there. The main issue is, where is the border going to be, right? Where is the line between Ukraine and the new republics of Russia? Where's that line going to be? That's the real point of contention. And, it looks like in order for that to end, there's not going to be a shutout, as they call it. I guess in baseball, an old-fashioned baseball term is that a pitcher, if he pitches a game and not a single person hits the ball, right? Not a single batter hits a ball. That's called a shutout, where the pitcher just strikes, every single batter strikes out. And shutouts in baseball are very, very, very rare, because there are very, very few pitchers that are good enough and batters that are bad enough. Rarely do you get the perfect storm where you have an entire baseball game where one side doesn't score at least one run, or at least, one base. It just doesn't happen. And that's true for life as well. There are very few shutouts in life, right? Generally, you go through life, you can win a lot, but you lose a little bit, right? You can lose a lot, but you'll still gain a little bit. Very few things, in life are like that. In order for this war to end, there's going to have to be an agreement where both sides are willing to let it end. And that's going to be hard to reach, and that both sides feel an obligation. Donald Trump is under a huge amount of pressure, because it seems like, even though Donald Trump, took office on a platform of, I'm not going to cause new wars, I'm going to end wars, I'm going to make deals. At the same time, he's still dealing with an economy in the United States that is centered around war. He's still dealing with support from the military-industrial complex. Many of his biggest supporters are people tied in with the defense industry. He's raising military spending. Tulsi Gabbard, who I think is a really, really brilliant woman in a lot of ways. She's not an anti-imperialist. She's pro-Israel. It looks like she prevented World War III, and there's been some great writing about that by one of our CPI organizers. I can't wait until that article is published. It's in the works. And, but Tulsi Gabbard's not an anti-imperialist, but she's smart enough to prevent World War III. And it looks like she was able to prevent a war with Iran recently, and prevent Israel from attacking Iran. And that's good. But, a lot of Trump's biggest supporters are pro-Israel people who hate Iran. And so Trump is negotiating with Iran while many of his biggest supporters hate Iran. It's about the balance of forces. And I've said this over and over and over again. And I've written about this over and over again. I've got What is Bonapartism? I've written, Where is America Going? It's not about who the good guys are and the bad guys are. It's about the balance of forces. There are different interests and different factions that are competing with each other for power. And, the leadership of any country, the leadership of any country is going to be a compromise. A leader of a country, especially as big as the United States, with so many different competing economic and financial interests, any such leader is going to have to compromise and please a lot of different people. And especially if he's going against the prevailing trend of U.S. foreign policy, he's going to have to please a lot of people that want things the opposite way. And so it's complicated. And again, this isn't about Donald Trump being good. And this isn't about Donald Trump being a good guy. I don't know if Donald Trump's a good guy. I've met him before. He seemed okay, but, and a lot of people who meet him get a good vibe and say that he's good, but he's done a lot of things. I mean, murdering Qasem Soleimani, awful. Deporting students for their, political views about Israel, awful. So, this El Salvador stuff, unconscionable. I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. And it doesn't really matter, right? This social media, television, movies, right? They want, people think it's the American president. People think this is the West Wing. No, it's not, right? This is real life. And it's real life. And this is what I continue to tell people. This is real life. And in many situations, I continue to say to people, stop with the Netflix. Stop with the Hollywood, right? This is real life. This is real life, okay? It's not about good guys and bad guys, right? It's real life. It's real life. And that applies to our own organizing. My organization, Center for Political Innovation, we exist to get shit done. We have shit we need to get done. That's what matters, is getting shit done. We have to hold a group of people together to get shit done. We have to carry out our operations to try and build an anti-imperialist movement. That's what matters. And, you know, I want to be as nice to everybody as I possibly can. And I want to, you know, make sure that everyone gets the respect that they're due and all of that. But at the end of the day, my job is to get shit done. And, you know, a lot of people are really suffering nowadays. Let me put it that way. A lot of people are having hardships, but my job is to get shit done. And, you know, I have to be there for people, and we have shit to do. And that's why we've changed a lot of things, because we have a lot that needs to get done, right? There's a lot that needs to get done, and there's a lot of fooling around. There's a lot of fooling around that's going around on many different angles. There's a lot of distractions, and our job is to just get shit done. And, you know, I got shit to do. We got shit to do, and we're getting it done. But anyway, there's a couple other news events I wanted to mention quickly. One thing, I don't know if you saw, but I am very proud to see some protesters supporting Palestine confronting AOC, right? AOC, she's supposed to be a socialist. They're trying to plug her as potentially a presidential candidate in 2028. And AOC continues to support Israel despite making mild criticisms. And this is what happened recently.
In order to defend and what you're doing about the genocide in Gaza.
Now, that was quite a disruption. You know, and I've been observing disruptions before. I've engaged in disruptions before. I could critique that. I could give you my critique, but that was a pretty effective disruption. You know, it wasn't up there with Jose Vega yet. It wasn't like a Jose Vega. Jose Vega has disruption down to an art, right? That guy knows exactly how to get it done. She wasn't exactly there. You couldn't exactly understand what she was saying. She wasn't recording it herself and all of that. But you know, that was a pretty effective disruption. And disrupting the, you know, imperialists is an important thing. And what she was saying was absolutely right. Children are dying in Gaza. Israel is relentless. And so, you know, hey, applause to her, and good for her for confronting AOC and not just making it sound like the problem is Republicans, because there's a big layer of these Palestine protesters that are really just running interference for the Democrats, right? The Democrats want to have their cake and eat it too. On the one hand, the Democrats want to be able to say, we're the party that's not Islamophobic, and all the Muslims need to vote for us because big scary Donald Trump hates Muslims and is, you know, a big supporter of Israel and hates Muslims. So you got to vote for us. On the one hand. On the other hand, the Democrats want to do what Joe Biden did and give Israel everything it wants. And that's why millions of Muslim Americans voted for Jill Stein of the Green Party in key states like Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Illinois, and places like that. There was even a layer, especially in Detroit, of Muslim Americans who voted for Trump, right, in Dearborn, Michigan, and other places. And the Muslim community stuck to their guns. They said, no, Democrats, yes, I understand Trump is bad, but you have the same policy as him as far as Israel, and you want us to be so afraid of Trump's nasty words, that we have to vote for you, and you're not giving us what we want. And when the Democrats wouldn't even allow a Palestinian speaker at their convention, that sealed the deal. And Jill Stein, who's Jewish, Jill Stein is Jewish, by the way. Jill Stein is a Jewish leftist, and she ran on an anti-Israel platform for the Green Party, and millions of Muslims voted for her. And that's really important, right? And that had an impact on the election results. And as bad as Trump is, as much as Trump pandered hard to Israel, as much as Trump has targeted the Palestine protesters, when Trump got into office, he did what Biden did not do. From October 7th to the time Biden left the White House, there was not a ceasefire. As soon as Trump got in, there was a 30-day ceasefire. So Trump actually has a better record on Israel and Palestine than Biden does. And I mean, that's not saying much because Trump has been pretty awful, right? Trump is bombing Yemen, but Biden bombed Yemen. Trump is targeting the pro-Palestine protesters and deporting them, and that's wrong. I don't agree with that. So Trump, I mean, I'm not saying Trump is good on the question, but he's better than Biden was because Biden was awful. And the Democrats continue to run this game of Muslims and critics of Israel must vote for us. There is absolutely no reason. And disrupting AOC is necessary because, there is no way that the Democrats are better on the question of Israel and Palestine than the Republicans are. The Republicans aren't good, and Trump certainly isn't good on that question, but the Democrats are not better. They are slightly worse, maybe not in words, but in actions. So, I mean, at the end of the day, there is no reason the Democrats should have any claim whatsoever on anti-Israel Americans' votes, and among Trump's supporters, not among the conservatainment industry. The Daily Wire is going bankrupt, though. I mean, conservatainment is not doing too well, and the Daily Wire is going bankrupt. I guess the guy who made the Daily Wire was investing their money in movies. He was trying to become a Hollywood producer, and he made all this money off Ben Shapiro, and he fired Candace Owens and all of this. And then I guess he wanted to be a big movie producer, and so he bankrupted the company with all these movie projects they did that tanked. But the Daily Wire is going under. And if you read the comments sections on conservative, go read the InfoWars Alex Jones comment sections, go and read the comment sections. The stuff that Candace Owens says is pretty widespread among conservatives. And that is my big criticism of the pro-Palestine movement. I agree largely, for the most part, with what they're saying, right? I mean, I've been open. I'm very critical of Israel. I've spoken at anti-Israel conferences in Iran. I've written a book about the Houthi movement and where they came from. I'm very critical of Israel, but, I went to the pro-Palestine protest encampments. I went to the one at City College. I went to the one at Columbia. And I went to the one at Columbia a number of times to cover it for my job. And the response and the tone of those folks was disgusting. They should have been saying, we love America. America comes first. Why are we funding this foreign war? Money for jobs and schools for Americans, not weapons for Israel. That should have been their message. It should have been a populist appeal. And many people in the Trump camp would have agreed with that. In fact, there's many people in the Trump camp who are kind of pro-Israel for religious reasons. Might say, okay, well, Israel, I have to support it for Christian reasons, but it's not our business. We should stay out of it. You could win over a lot of people with that message, but that was not the message of the pro-Palestine encampments. And I went to City College and I went to Columbia, and the message was, fuck you. The message was hate. It was a hate. These were hate rallies, not hatred for Jews, hatred for everybody. It was a bunch of people with their faces covered up, giving the middle finger, burn it down, intifada, free, It was the most hateful, angry, they're waving a foreign flag. Most Americans don't know what that flag is. They're blocking people on their way to work. And here I am, right? And I'm covering their events as somebody who's gone to conferences in Iran, who is, has written books about the Houthis. And I mean, I'm on their side, and I show up and people in hoods and masks run over to me. We know who you are, Caleb. You're a Nazi. You're a white supremacist. Oh, we're going to fuck you up. And I'm thinking, like, if you can't even get along with me, right? I'm like, I've been protesting Israel since before these people, when some of these kids were in diapers, for Christ's sakes, right? And if they can't even get along with me, how are they going to get along with the American people? How are they going to get along with the American people? I mean, they're not going to get along with the American people, right? My favorite line. So when I went to cover the protest at New School, or at City College, I remember I went there with my cameraman, and we're just covering the protest. And as I walked in, right, a couple of these people in masks run over, and they're just, oh, F you, Caleb, we know who you are. And I said, guys, we're on your side. We're anti-Israel, right? I'm on your side. I'm anti-Israel. And they said, quote, "That's just because of Russian imperialist bullshit." And it's like, wow, okay. So, geez, I mean, the next time a Muslim comes to the rally, do you say, and they say they're anti-Israel, do you say, oh, that's just because of your Muslim bullshit, right? Or if a liberal comes to the rally and says, well, that's just because of your liberal bullshit. I mean, my goodness, you can't, I don't agree with you for the right reasons. I don't know what Russian imperialism has to do with it. I know that Russia was actually quite sympathetic to Israel in the past. Now, lately, Russia has been very critical of Israel. They've been loudly condemning and opposing Israel at the UN Security Council since October 7th. But, at one point, Putin was quite friendly with Netanyahu. I don't think my support for the Palestinians is because of Russia, right? I mean, I think long before I'd ever appeared on RT, I was protesting in Cleveland with my long hair and my beard in support of the Palestinians. So, I don't know what to say, but it's like the pro-Palestine movement is right in demanding that our tax money as Americans not go to fund the bombing of the Palestinians. But the approach was intentionally anti-populist. They went out of their way to alienate the millions and millions of people, especially Trump supporters, who would be sympathetic to such a message. And so I have to stand alone. And, if I wanted to be popular, yeah, I would just go, woo, free Palestine. I would just repeat what they're saying, but I can't do that, right? I can't do that. I have to say, look, and we had a small demonstration in Portland, Oregon, with a message that went over very well. And I can show the video again. I probably won't, because we got other things to talk about here tonight. But, we had a very small demonstration where we waved American flags. We had an American flag and a Palestine flag and a big banner that said money for jobs and schools for America, not weapons for Israel. That's what we said. And, they say, oh, Caleb, you can't say that. No one will support that message. Bullshit. People ran out of their apartment buildings to get flyers from us. People were giving us the fist. The only person who was hostile to us was some guy who didn't like us because of thought slime and started yelling about tankies and ripping up flyers. Some chronically online loser in a coffee shop who didn't like CPI because he heard about us on a bread tube smear video. That was the only person that didn't like the message. Yeah, everyone loved it. Everyone was sympathetic. And we're in Portland, the peak woke. So the idea that you couldn't do the Palestine rallies in a populist way is bullshit. You absolutely could do them. But they're not being done in a populist way because the people who run them are agents, right? I mean, there are people like Danny Haiphong. There are people like the Party of Socialism and Liberation that are agents, right? I mean, the Party of Socialism and Liberation is funded by Roy Singham, who's a very, very wealthy billionaire who's invested heavily in China, who is basically involved in trying to nudge and manipulate China's internal politics. And, Brian Becker has been trying to be king of the protest cage his whole life, going back to the Iraq War. And, Danny Haiphong, he did a whole thing about how if you wave an American flag, you're Hitler. And they know what they're doing, right? And they're running a psyop. Their goal is to, their goal is basically to create distance between average Americans and anti-imperialism. That's what they want to do, right? And I think some of them are very open about it. I mean, Danny Haiphong is very open about it. At one point when we were still engaging on Twitter, he basically told me that he thinks average Americans benefit from imperialism and are the enemy. That's what he said, right? And he blatantly spelled it out there. Average Americans benefit from imperialism. Average Americans are the enemy. He actually, he actually said that. I mean, he's very open about it, right? So yeah, I mean, there's, so these people, they know what they're doing, right? And when it really gets down to it, look, I'll just throw this out there, right? There's a lot of people who accuse me of being a foreign agent. They say, well, Caleb, you've worked with international TV networks and you've spoken at these conferences. You are working for some foreign country to try and destroy America. Bullshit. Bullshit. I'm not doing that. I am trying to save America from imperialism. And I believe that the future of America is joining the new economy that's rising in the East. And I want a government of action that fights for working families. And I want a rationally planned economy. And I believe that the new economic model that comes from the BRICS countries, where you have a pro-growth government that invests in people, is good for America. And everything I do is done out of love for my country and love for my people. Whereas what PSL does, what the people running the pro-Palestine protests do, what Danny Haifeng does, is motivated by trying to show everyone how much they hate America. They want everyone to know that America is an evil country and the Americans are evil people who benefit from imperialism, and they're the good ones. They fantasize they're the good Germans, right? They're the Germans who hid Jews under the stairs during World War II, and America is Nazi Germany, and all these people are little Eichmanns, and they're all just going along with it. And I'm the good one. And they have no plan to ever change society, no plan to ever build a mass movement. They just want to be able to justify their alienation. Look, there's no nice way to say this, and I'm a little bit of a hypocrite because I come out of this, but I know it. These are people who got bullied. These are people that have mental health issues and don't fit in with the country they live in, okay? And they want to feel righteous in that, right? And so anti-imperialism, or what they think is anti-imperialism, is a way to hide. It's a way to say, well, the reason I don't fit in is because I'm morally superior. I don't like imperialism. I don't like what my government is doing. And I'm just, all these people that have bullied me and made fun of me and all of that, they're just Nazis and I'm the good one. And it is a place to hide psychologically. And if you know Danny Haifeng, that's the kind of person he is, right? That's what he is. He's just a socially awkward nerd who's been bullied his whole life and hates average Americans and wants to be better than them. So he's an anti-imperialist because the reason that he hasn't fit in and all of that is because he's actually better than them. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, look at this bookshelf. I'm a bit of a nerd myself, and I've struggled with this, but I have actively made a decision to push back against anti-populism. I have learned through my adult life that is the road to nowhere. It might be the road to being famous on the internet and feeling good about yourself, but it's the road to nowhere. It's not serious politics. No movement. No, you have no right. I'll just be honest with you. And this might hurt some people to hear it, but again, I'm not trying to be popular on the internet. I'm trying to build a real movement. You have no right to talk about running America's government if you hate America. If the words "I hate America," if you think the American flag is racist, if you think America is an evil country, you have no business talking about American politics, right? You can't be president of Brazil if you say fuck Brazil. You can't be president of Iran if you say fuck Iran. You can't be president of Venezuela if you say fuck Venezuela. You can't be president of Russia if you say fuck Russia. So why in the world does anyone think that if they go around saying fuck America, they have then the right to say, and we would like to run the government, and Americans should vote for us and join our movement? I mean, are you delusional? Are you on crack? Right? I mean, it's just not how it works, right? I'm trying to think of an example, but if a guy sells cars for a living, right? And if a guy sells electric cars for a living, you don't go into his store and try and get him to sign a petition, electric cars are bad. You should go somewhere else. Maybe go to an electric car store. Maybe go to, a place where people make batteries, electric car batteries. Go to a mineral area. But if a guy, sells electric cars for a living, you don't go into his store and try to get him to sign a petition against electric cars. And if you want to rule America You want to build a mass movement in America. You want to organize the American people against imperialism. You can't have an attitude of fuck America. It's very basic. It's very basic stuff. And it might make you feel good, and it might make you feel righteous, and it might make you feel powerful. And, you know, there's a lot of evil in America. There's a lot of bad things in our culture, in our society. There's a lot of bad things, not just in our history, but in the way we're living right now. I could critique American culture backwards and forwards. I mean, if you want to hear me, sit down with me. As an American, I can critique America all day long. There's plenty to critique, not just in the history, but in the culture. And I mean, there's plenty wrong with this place. But if my criticism is not coming from a place of, I want this place to be better, right? If my criticism isn't coming from a place of, in order to make this place better, we need to change this. And I love the people here, and I want a better life for the people here. If that's not the place that your criticism is coming from, no one should listen to it, right? If somebody walks up to you and says, fuck you, you piece of shit, are you going to listen to them? Let's say that you have a weight problem, right? That you're overweight. You're overweight. If somebody randomly walks up to you on the street and says, hey, fatty, you're overweight, are you going to listen to that person? No, you're just going to think I'm being attacked by a jerk. But if a friend of yours, who really is a good friend of yours, sits down and says, hey, man, you know, have you considered maybe, you know, getting on a diet? I'm a little bit worried about you. You know, you might not like hearing it, but it comes from a place of concern. He cares about you, right? And he's just worried about your health. And you're going to take it very, very differently. And I mean, the Palestine rallies, their approach to America was basically, they were just doing everything they could to make sure that the bulk of the American people never listened to them. And it's at a time when the American people are apt to listen to them, right? And especially in the Trump camp. No, we can't talk to Trump supporters. They're all racist. They're all sexist, you know, and it's just, you know, that is my criticism of the Palestine protest movement. I agree with their message pretty much. I agree. No more funding of Israel. I agree, you know, but the manner in which they carried it out, I think that funding Israel is bad for America. That's what I think. I think funding Israel alienates us from the Muslims of the world. I think funding Israel, hurts, our interest as Americans, that we should be paving our roads. We should be building hospitals. We should be investing in our communities. And instead we're investing in bombs and tanks and weapons. Israel is encroaching on our civil liberties. There are a number of states where in order to be an employee of the state, you must swear to never boycott Israel. I cannot believe that. That's an attack on our freedom. Right? The fact that, you basically have to pledge loyalty to a foreign government in order to work for certain states in this country. That's wrong, right? And that Israel is bad for the real America. It's good for Wall Street. It's good for imperialism. It's good for the international bankers. It's good for the big finance monopolies. But it's not good for America. And America is suffering right now. And it's suffering because of this global system of imperialism. And Israel is an integral part of that system. Israel is essential in that system. And so let's make that argument, right? The strongest, one of the biggest arguments of the Zionists and Israel supporters is they say, the enemies of Israel are anti-American. Right. And so by supporting Israel, you're supporting yourself, because those Muslims want to kill you just as much as they want to kill us. That's not true. That is not true. However, that's what Zionists say. And the way the pro-Palestine movement operates is like they're trying to be an argument for that. And again, I'm at the point, folks, where I've been doing this my whole adult life, right? I've been in communist groups my whole adult life. When I was 19, I joined the Workers' World Party, and I was in a Maoist group. I was around a Maoist group and doing work with a Maoist group before that. And I've been doing this my whole adult life. And I have seen the failures. I have seen and I just don't hold back, right? And I don't hold back, and I tell you how it is. And, with my faith in God and my love of the country and my understanding of the flaws of the capitalist economic system, and my understanding of what imperialism is, my understanding of the achievements of socialist countries, despite the difficulties they were up against and the real flaws they have, my understanding of 21st century socialism and all of that, we have developed innovationism. And innovationism is the future. And innovationism, when it really gets down to it, is what most Americans are looking for. They are looking for this ideology, the ideology of innovationism. That's what most Americans want when it really gets down to it. They want innovationism. They don't know it yet. And we've got to build the movement. And it's not easy. And it's not easy. It is not easy to build a movement, right? It is not easy to build a movement, especially in these times. But we have to do it. Right. And it's a hard job, but you know what? I'm in good life circumstances where I have an income and I have time, and I've met some really great people that are really dedicated, and we just have to keep going. And it is not easy, but we got to build this movement. We've got to build this movement. That's what we've got to do. We've got to build the innovationist movement. We got to do it. And, it's not an internet movement. It's not being cool online, and it's not, we've got to build the community of solidarity. And anyone who's come to a CPI workshop can tell you how amazing it is. And anyone who's come to one of our big conventions can tell you how amazing it is. There's a glow, there's an optimism, there's a hope that flows through everything we do. There's a guy in Chicago who's helping build for our convention. He's one of our members, and he said, I've been in a lot of different groups, Caleb. CPI is the first group I've ever been in that's fun. That's what he said. This is the first group like this I've been in, Caleb, that's fun. He said, I've been in communist groups before. I've been in anarchist groups. This group is fun. There you go. Well, I agree. I think I agree. Yes, we are fun. He said, this is the first group, right? I'm having fun as I'm doing this. I'm not like, well, hey, we give off a different vibe. It's fun. It is very fun to be in CPI. We do fun stuff. So there you go. There you go. And I mean, we have a group of very dedicated people, who are doing great stuff. And if I start naming names, I'm going to forget somebody. So I'm not going to start naming names. But anyway, a couple other news items I wanted to talk about. This was Rand Paul. Something's up with Kentucky, folks. Kentucky. So you've got Rand Paul, who's very anti-war, member of the U.S. Senate. You've got Thomas Massie, who's also very anti-war, is the only anti-Israel Republican, right? Who goes out, and is very anti-war, anti-Israel and all that. He's also in Kentucky. And you got our member, Jeff Young, founder of the Kentucky Party. He's a member of CPI, and he's speaking at our upcoming convention. He's run for office, and he's Jeff Young, right? He's great. He's an anti-imperialist, in Kentucky, who's founded the Kentucky Party, and he's a member of CPI. He loves the work that we do. And Kentucky, there is some anti-imperialist energy in Kentucky. I am thinking that, maybe someday CPI ought to set up shop in Kentucky. Maybe we ought to have a building or a headquarters in Kentucky, because it seems like, for whatever reason, Kentucky is turning into a place. But anyway, this is Rand Paul, the U.S. Senator from Kentucky, Republican, conservative, son of Ron Paul, libertarian, conservative. And this is what he said. There's a bill before Congress to outlaw anti-Semitism. And this was his response to it in a congressional hearing. Listen to this.
I'd like to begin by asking unanimous consent that we enter into the records the names of 400 Jewish American comedians who have referred to Jews in stereotypical language, which perhaps may be condemned by this bill. And I'd like to at least have their names introduced in the record as with my assertion.
Without objection.
When we think about, even saying Jews are funny is a stereotypical allegation, and I know some Jewish people who aren't, so it really obviously cannot be true of all Jews. But I wanted to read one, though, that I thought was particular. I was looking through these this morning, and there's just so many. I just didn't know how many Jewish comedians we had. This one's from Joan Rivers. She says, I'm Jewish. I don't work out. If God had wanted us to bend over, he would have put diamonds on the floor. And that's obviously very negative, that Jewish people think only of money and stuff. But she's Jewish, and it's It's funny, but or it's not funny, but it's just a right to, make a joke. But most jokes are about stereotypes. If you look at most of the Seinfeld episodes, there's the one on Native Americans and the totem pole and scalping of tickets and all these things that you're not supposed to say anymore. And, we become a humorless society if we want to restrict people's speech. And some of it is bad speech. And, I'm not going to a rally where people say Hamas is great. I think Hamas is awful and evil and committed murder and it's a massacre. But at the same time, I don't want to prohibit speech and protests on college campuses.
Yeah. And he's just basically pointing out that, if you pass a law that you're not allowed to say various things because they're considered anti-Semitic, there's over 400 Jewish American comedians who could no longer do their routines because they say things that are, that this has gotten to be pretty ridiculous, right? That obviously preaching hatred, literal hatred, not humor, not criticism, but hatred, murderous hatred for any ethnic group, Jewish, Muslim, Arab, Black, Asian. I mean, it's wrong, right? And obviously it shouldn't be done. But, if you start listing, no, you're not allowed to say certain things, that gets to be very dangerous. And let's also point out that criticism, this is a point that somebody made to me the other day, criticism is not the same as hate, right? You can criticize somebody without hating them, right? I mean, look, I don't hate America, but I'm very, very critical of our economic system and especially of our foreign policy. But I don't hate America. And it is possible to be very critical of something without hating it. One can be very critical of Israel and Jewish people without hating them, right? One can even argue that Israel shouldn't exist as a nation and not hate Jews, right? You can just be very critical, right? That murderous hatred and criticism are not the same thing, right? And if the response to any criticism is murderous hatred, or I'm sorry, let me put it this way. If all criticism is treated as murderous hatred, the result is going to be more murderous hatred because you are intentionally obscuring the difference between criticism and hatred, right? And so the result is you're going to get more hatred because everyone is going to be criticized. Everyone and everything is going to be criticized. And if you equate criticism with murderous hatred, the people doing the criticizing are going to say, oh, well, I guess we're murderously hating because they're not going to criticize. And you're treating them as if they're preaching murderous hatred anyway, so they might as well. And honestly, that's kind of the place we're in. I don't want to expound on this too much further, but since October 7th, right, first of all, the establishment has been screaming, no criticism of Israel. That's anti-Semitism. But I've actually seen a lot more anti-Semitism. Stuff that didn't used to pass is passing now because that's the response. It's like, it's the little boy who cried wolf, right? The little boy who cried wolf, right? I mean, when the wolf finally comes, he's cried wolf so many times, they don't believe him. And that's kind of where we're at. I'm seeing more anti-Semitic stuff out there that is, in the anti-Semitic category. And nobody cares because, they're more concerned about, people saying free Palestine, that's anti-Semitism. So then somebody shows up and they're not saying free Palestine, they're saying other stuff. And no, it's all the same. And I mean, but anyway, I could go on about all of this all night. There's another clip I wanted to show you. And this clip is particularly important. And it has a lot to do with what we're doing with the Center for Political Innovation. So this is, at this point, North Korea is involved in Russia's special military operation. Russia is at this point acknowledging there is North Korean involvement. I guess there was rumors of it before when there weren't, but at this point there is, right? Kim Jong-un is going to be there on Victory Day. So the Russian philosopher, who I do respect, despite disagreeing with him on a number of points, but I do respect him, I met Dugin in 2018. I sat down with Dugin and I spoke at his anti-globalization conference. And I was canceled for it and smeared for it, right? But I did it. And I always said, I respect Dugin. He's a very important philosopher. He's a very important thinker. And that's what I said. And that, and I canceled for it and smeared for it. Well, I still respect him. I think his book, The Fourth Political Theory, has a lot of good observations in it. I think his understanding of geopolitics and Eurasianism points to a lot. And I respect Dugin. I don't agree with everything he's ever said or done. He doesn't agree with everything I've ever said or done. But I respect him. That's all I ever said. And I did this way back in 2018. And I got canceled for it. I was banned from spaces. I was called a bad person. Oh my God, I was evil. And, somehow they said Dugin was a Nazi, which I've met the dude. He's definitely not a Nazi. I mean, Russia is like the best friend of Africa right now. And there are things, he doesn't believe in historical progress. That's one point of disagreement. There are other things we disagree about. But Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher, is very much an anti-imperialist, and he understands that the Cold War is over and it's not the capitalism versus communism stuff. It's about something different. It's about liberalism and Western liberalism versus the societies that reject liberalism. And he's got some very deep analysis that I would really encourage people to dig into. And I've been saying what I just said for year after year after year, right? And I've been canceled for it, and I've been put on every list, and I'm such a bad person for saying it, but I stand by what I said, and I do not back down from it. And other people, just 1 or 2 years ago, they just decided, oh yeah, we like Dugin too, and it's like, oh really, you like Dugin too? That's funny. Well, and do they stand up and say, and what's been done to Caleb is wrong? No. Do they? No. They don't do that. In fact, they repeat the same smears and lies about me that other people do, right? And it just shows that I'm ahead of the game. I'm used to being 2 or 3 years ahead of the game. I am 2 or 3 years ahead of the game. What I don't like is the competitiveness. I don't understand why people, it can never be, wow, Caleb's 2 or 3 years ahead of the game, and let's work with Caleb, and then we can gain that. No. It's always got to be Caleb's wrong, Caleb's bad, but we're going to do what Caleb said. And, and it's this, these people are not organizers. They're social media grifters. They're social media. They just care about how they look on the internet. They're rude, childish, and competitive. And it's unfortunate that people act this way. But Alexander Dugin is a really important voice. And I went out on a limb, and I got my reputation smeared and destroyed for saying this, right? And I never backed down, and I said it. And then I created the space where these other people could also say that Dugin is great. Well, that's nice. I'm glad. You should thank me for that. You should thank me for going out and getting myself canceled and smeared and creating the space for you to talk to Dugin. But do you do that? No. And in fact, you team up with the very same people who smeared me and repeat the exact same lies. So, these people are not sincere, and they're not real organizers, and they're social media grifters, and who cares? But anyway, back to the main point. Alexander Dugin, Russian philosopher, now that it is confirmed that there are North Korean troops in Russia's special military operation, that North Korea was key, the Russian president said, in retaking the Kursk region. Alexander Dugin made this video about North Korea, which I thought was very important and insightful. This is what he said.
Of Yusha isn't some Soviet-era term. It's the prevailing ideology of North Korea, representing absolute civilizational sovereignty, the principle of relying on one's own existence. This ancient Confucian concept, deeply philosophical, echoes Heidegger's Dasein, being there. The North Koreans declare, we are here. We exist in this world, on this land where our ancestors lived. This is our history. However small we may seem, we are great because we understand our inner dimension, our truth. This conviction grants them tremendous strength to endure hardship and deprivation. When nations and political systems like this come to our aid in critical moments, helping secure our victory, which thus becomes their victory, we must recognize their value. Kim Jong-un's decision to send soldiers to fight for this sacred cause marks, I believe, a historic breakthrough. Ultimately, this is a war of ideas. We wage war against liberal globalization, against hegemony. Those on our side, the side of a multipolar world, sovereignty, dignity, and honor, are fighting this battle with us. Let there be more of them. These are not mercenaries, they are friends, they are brothers. They joined us ideologically. That alone makes their contribution priceless.
Now, that was a tremendous video, but there was so much in there that I am going to go through this video one more time, but we're going to stop it after he makes a point and really just take in the point that he makes, because that is wow, right? That point that the respected Russian philosopher made about North Korea, that video, there's like 20 really good points in that video, right? And that really short, I think that was just over 1 minute, he's talking about North Korea and their involvement in the Russian conflict. And it's like, boom, right? Here we go.
Of Yusha isn't some Soviet-era term. It's the prevailing ideology of North Korea.
Now, what is he saying? So the ideology of Juche, which is the state ideology of North Korea, is not a Soviet-era term. It's the prevailing ideology of North Korea. Now, what is he saying there, right? North Korea, right, officially, it began as a Marxist-Leninist government, right? It was a Soviet-aligned government on the Korean Peninsula. But they, especially during the 1970s and 80s, when China and the Soviet Union were divided, they really emphasized that they had Juche ideology. They were neither Maoists nor Soviet revisionists. They had their own ideology called Juche, which means self-reliance. And they still believe in Juche. And they still argue that Juche is its own thing. And Dugin is saying that you can't dismiss Juche as just, oh, another, every Eastern Bloc country had their government and their ideology. Romania had Ceausescu, and Poland had various leaders, and Erich Honecker. And no, right? He's pointing out that North Korea still exists, and that this ideology of Juche, which means self-reliance that they believe in, is still their beliefs, and it has transcended the Soviet era. It is not simply a rebranding, it's not the Korean brand of Soviet communism, right? Juche is socialism with Korean characteristics. It is a uniquely Korean ideology for the Korean Peninsula. And that this is something that is really important to take in, right? The idea that, this is the Marxism, Leninism is the universal science of revolution. Well, you can learn a lot from Marxism, Leninism. I have, but the world has largely moved on from that. And that Juche is not just Marxism, Leninism, just a rebranding of Soviet ideology. It is a uniquely Korean understanding. This is very important. Next.
Absolute civilizational sovereignty, the principle of relying on one's own existence. This ancient Confucian concept, deeply philosophical, echoes Heidegger's Dasein, being there. The North Koreans declare...
Now, what Juche literally means is self-reliance. And self-reliance is the understanding that, that a country should rely purely on itself and civilizational independence, and that this is a concept that we, the Korean people, must exist. We do exist. We are a people. We are a nationality. That's what Juche is saying, and that we have to be Koreans for Korea. We are one people, one nationality. That's a very, very important point to make, and it goes back to Confucius and Confucius's concept of the great relationships and all of that. This is important stuff.
We are here. We exist in this world, on this land where our ancestors lived. This is our history. However small we may seem, we are great because we understand our inner dimension, our truth. This conviction grants them tremendous strength to endure hardship and deprivation.
Now, what is he pointing out there? He's like, with their Juche ideology, with their attachment to the land, with their belief in we are a people, and the spiritual power of the nation, right? The spiritual power of saying we are the people, we are here on the land, we exist no matter how small we are one people, we are Koreans, we are. With that power, they can endure great hardship. And North Korea has endured great hardship. Every building above 1 story tall was bombed and destroyed during the Korean War. They lost 4 million citizens. After the fall of the Soviet Union, their food system came to a grinding halt because they couldn't get petroleum, and people starved to death. But yet they have endured. They proliferated their own nuclear weapons, and they've launched satellites into orbit. They've endured, and that endurance that North Korea has is rooted in the spiritual power of their self-reliant Dasein, their self-reliance ideology. This is really deep, what Alexander Dugin is saying here. By saying we are one people, we are one nation on this land, they have a strength, a spiritual strength from that nationalism, from that community, from that collectivism as a people, that national identity that has enabled them to endure great hardship and suffering and hold their country together and not collapse. That's really important. right? That you know, the Eastern Bloc countries, the Soviet Union fell, all the Eastern Bloc countries fell, but North Korea stayed intact. And the fact that in the 1970s and 80s, they developed Juche. And they had a rectification campaign. They had their own cultural revolution where they emphasized the Juche ideology, and they transcended the classical Marxist-Leninist way of doing things and really focused on their uniquely Korean understanding of things that enabled them to endure. This is really heavy what Dugin is saying.
Nations and political systems like this come to our aid in critical moments, helping secure our victory, which thus becomes their victory. We must recognize their value. Kim Jong-un's decision to send...
Yeah, so Russia is now receiving support on the battlefield from North Korea. North Korea feels that Russia's fight against the U.S.-imposed regime in Kiev is their own fight, right? It is their own fight, and they feel such a spiritual connection with what Putin is doing in Russia. They feel that it's a similar kind of thing of, we are the people, these are our lands, we have been here, we will not surrender. And they have an attachment to Russia that they have sent their military forces. This is big. This is very, very big.
To fight for this sacred cause marks, I believe, a historic breakthrough. Ultimately, this is a war of ideas. We wage war against liberal globalization, against hegemony. Those on our side, the side of a multipolar world, sovereignty, dignity, and honor, are fighting this battle with us.
Right. So it's a war of ideology. Liberalism and globalization speaks only of the individual and of all humanity. It never speaks of nations. It never speaks of collective identities. It's only all humanity and individuals, and it seeks atomization, breaking people down into individuals to weaken them and to control them. Globalization rejects sovereignty, rejects nationality, rejects socialism and economic collectivization. Liberal globalization is what is really at stake here, right? If you look at the Western world, money above all else, profits in command, and no obligation between people, no nexus remaining between man and man, but callous cash payment, naked self-interest. Money comes first, breaking and atomizing people down into individuals, right? You look at how lonely people are in American society and how much people feel abandoned, feel like no one is there for them. How, you know, families are coming apart, communities are coming apart. People don't know their neighbors. People don't care about each other, right? We have an economic system where, you know, you're on your own. No health care, no education provided. You know, you're on your own. And that is the reality of what the West is deteriorating into. And that is what they're trying to fight against. They're saying we are Korea, one nation. Russia's saying we are Russia, we are one nation. And we're all in this together. And this is our land. This is our people, our struggle, right? They're fighting for sovereignty. This is an ideological battle. The multipolar world says no, nations, communities, collective identities have the right to exist. And the liberal globalization is resisting that. This is very deep. Let me continue.
More of them. These are not mercenaries. They are friends. They are brothers. They joined us ideologically. That alone makes their contribution priceless.
Right? So these are not mercenaries. It's not like Putin just hired North Korea to send troops there. They're brothers because spiritually, Russia and North Korea have the same fight against liberal hegemony and globalization. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you that America has the same fight as well. And we, the American people, must resist liberal hegemony and globalization. And that just like the North Koreans have come together and they've said, this is Korea, this is our land, we are one people, and we are not going to be exploited, and we're going to pull together and be for ourselves, just like the Russians have come together and said, this is Russia, this is us, we are one people, we're going to come together, we're going to be there for each other, we're going to build up our country. I think we should do the same thing here in America. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need to be one people, one land, coming together, caring for each other, building, constructing, investing in communities. That's what we need. That is what we need. And that Dugin understands this, right? And that's why I give Dugin value. I don't necessarily agree with some of his other points, but that understanding that we're battling for multipolarity, sovereignty, national dignity in the face of liberal atomization, liberal globalization, a world where money and individualism come above all else, and that we're battling for the right to have a collective identity in a nation. This is really powerful, important stuff. This is really, really powerful, important stuff. And I really do appreciate Alexander Dugin saying that. And that video, that spoke to me. And, you know, I thought that was a great video about why Russia and North Korea are connected and what they're fighting for on the battlefields and the special military operation, why they are connected. And it actually relates very heavily to everything I've written about in this book. And now I know there are a number of Rumble rants that have come in from John McPeace and from Leo Messi and others. And I do appreciate those. And I will be answering those in the second half of the show. But before we get to the second half of the show, I figured tonight is as good a night to continue reading the book Khrushchevism. We finished chapter 1. So now I'm going to continue with chapter 2 of my new book, Khrushchevism, A Study in Psychological Warfare. So, sit tight, and we're going to do chapter 2. Then we'll do the roll call. And then after that, I will answer your questions for the remainder of the night. Chapter 2. On March 2nd, 1962, the TV science fiction series, The Twilight Zone, ran an episode that became a TV classic, often referenced in jokes and satire right up to today. The episode was entitled To Serve Man, and it was based on a short story written by Damon Knight and published in 1950. It was told of a group of space aliens coming to the Earth and surprising humanity with their apparent kindness. They cure cancer, greatly enhance the global food supply, and introduce all kinds of new technology to make life happier on our planet. When asked why they are being so kind, they point to a mysterious book called To Serve Man. As the story goes on, the aliens announce a program to fly some humans back to their home planet as a gesture of goodwill. Meanwhile, a group of scientists and linguists are actively trying to translate the mysterious To Serve Man book. As the episode concludes in a classic TV moment, with humans lined up and walking into the spaceship to return to the aliens' home planet, a woman runs out to make the faithful announcement, "Don't get on that ship. The book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook." The short story is certainly a clever spin on the sci-fi trope of intergalactic invaders, which was popular at the time in the aftermath of the 1947 UFO hysteria. However, it is more than that. It is a political message. In 1949, the year before the short story was published, the Communist Party of China had established the People's Republic on the mainland. What was the slogan that appeared on all the party badges and emblems of the new government led by Mao Zedong? Serve the people. At the height of the Cold War and McCarthyism, Knight's story was an obvious warning against communism. Even in 1962, as détente was setting in, it delivered the same message. Communists might offer guaranteed jobs, healthcare, and the wonders of a planned economy. But what they really want is to enslave you and eat you alive. This was the message of Cold War anti-communism at the time, and the story was a clever way of articulating it. The Twilight Zone, which launched as a TV program in 1959, was noted for its liberal, anti-totalitarian bent. The episode, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which aired in March of 1960, was a blatant attack on McCarthyism. It presented a group of neighbors becoming paranoid and thinking each other were aliens, making groundless accusations, only for it to later be revealed that this was the aliens' plan all along, to incite suspicion, confuse the humans, and set the stage for their invasion. Various other episodes of The Twilight Zone equate Stalin with Hitler, warn about demagogues and fascists, and present communism as just one form of collectivist totalitarianism that suppresses individual rights. All of this fit with the trajectory of American politics following the death of Stalin. On March 5th, 1953, Stalin died. At the same time, U.S. Senator Joe McCarthy was riding high as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Government Operations. McCarthy had risen to power falsely claiming he had a list of hundreds of card-carrying communists who worked in the U.S. State Department. The U.S. House Un-American Activities Committee began investigating and accusing people of ties to communism. Many were imprisoned for refusing to name names. Many careers were destroyed based on false accusations or vague guilt by association. At the time of Stalin's death, McCarthy was facing some solid opposition in the press, with his primary opponent being newspaper editor and Las Vegas real estate owner Hank Greenspun. Greenspun published a series of articles in 1952 purporting that Joe McCarthy was a homosexual. With confidential investigations, the FBI was able to verify these claims, interviewing young men whom Joe McCarthy had gotten drunk and then raped. Later, it was revealed that McCarthy's primary enemy in the media, Hank Greenspun, was more than just a newspaper tycoon. He was a Mossad operative. Greenspun stole millions of dollars worth of military equipment from the U.S. military bases in Nevada and smuggled them to Israel. He was given only a mild sentence for this, and eventually U.S. President John F. Kennedy pardoned him. After Stalin's death, Joe McCarthy's career began to swiftly decline. In the fall of 1953, McCarthy began investigating the U.S. military for alleged communist infiltration. He also targeted Voice of America and the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. Republican President Dwight Eisenhower denounced McCarthy as a book burner after the Overseas Library Program of the United States Bureau of Information began purging itself of books deemed subversive. The Army McCarthy hearings were broadcast on television, with Joe McCarthy coming across as a bully to many American viewers. In March of 1954, CBS News began airing a series of TV programs called See It Now, featuring Edward R. Murrow, who presented Joe McCarthy in a negative light. On June 19, 1954, U.S. Senator Lester C. Hunt committed suicide. Investigations into his death revealed that his son had been arrested for engaging in homosexual behavior, and Joe McCarthy had blackmailed him with this in order to get his support. This information made McCarthy even less popular. On December 2nd, the U.S. Congress voted to censure Joe McCarthy because he had, quote, repeatedly abused the members who were trying to carry out assigned duties and, quote, acted contrary to the senatorial ethics and tended to bring the Senate into dishonor and disrepute, to obstruct the constitutional processes of the Senate, and to impair it with dignity. From 1955 onward, Joe McCarthy faded into political isolation and eventually drank himself to death, dying of alcohol poisoning in 1957. However, some of the far right continued to idealize him as a Roman Catholic American patriot who fought against communism. The John Birch Society was formed by candy company owner Robert Welch as a group that maintained that McCarthy had been right all along and that Republican Dwight Eisenhower was himself a communist agent. The John Birch Society was castigated as a group of right-wing extremists, tools and cranks. Mainstream media mocked them, and the Twilight Zone was part of the overall rise of Cold War liberalism, which brought with it a new brand of anti-communism. Khrushchev began his 1956 tirade against Stalin this way, quote, "After Stalin's death, the Central Committee of the party began to implement a policy of concisely and consistently that it is impermissible and foreign to the spirit of Marxism-Leninism to elevate one person, to transform him into a Superman possessing supernatural characteristics, akin to those of a god. Such a man supposedly knows everything, sees everything, thinks for everyone, can do anything, and is infallible in his behavior. Such a belief about a man, specifically Stalin, was cultivated among us for many years. The objective of the present report is not a thorough evaluation of Stalin's life and activity. Concerning Stalin's merits, an entirely sufficient number of books, pamphlets, and studies had already been written in his lifetime. The role of Stalin in the preparation and the execution of the socialist revolution and the Civil War and in our fight for the construction of socialism in our country is universally known. Everyone knows this well. At present, we are concerned with the question which has immense importance for the party and for the future, with how the cult of the person of Stalin had been gradually growing, the cult which became, at certain specific stage, the source of a whole series of exceedingly serious and grave perversions of party principles, party democracy, and revolutionary legality. Khrushchev went on to expound on his condemnation of the, quote, cult of personality with glib words, attempting to give some credit to the man he defamed. Comrades, in order to not repeat the errors of the past, the Central Committee has declared itself resolutely against the cult of the individual. We consider that Stalin was excessively extolled. However, in the past, Stalin doubtless performed great services to the party, to the working class, and to the international workers' movement. We cannot say that these were deeds of a giddy despot. He considered that this should be done in the interest of the party, of the working masses, in the name of the defense of revolution's gains. In this lies the whole tragedy. Comrades, we must abolish the cult of the individual decisively. Once and for all, we must draw the proper conclusions concerning both ideological, theoretical, and practical work. It is necessary for this purpose. Comrades, the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union has manifested with a new strength the unshakable unity of our party, its cohesiveness around the Central Committee, its resolute will to accomplish the great task of building communism, and the fact that we present in all their ramifications the basic problems of overcoming the cult of the individual, which is alien to Marxism-Leninism, as well as the problem of liquidating its burdensome consequences, is evidence to the great moral and political strength of our party, end quote. The official title of the secret speech was On the Cult of Personality and Its Consequences. Khrushchev should really be understood as the originator of the term cult of personality, because he first used it in the way it is currently understood. A letter written by Karl Marx in 1877, in which he claimed he had no aspirations for fame, contains the sentence, quote, "Neither of us cares a straw for popularity. Let me cite one proof of this. Such was my aversion to the personality cult." In Germany at the time, romanticists were referred to as the cult of the genius, and widely debating the role of heroes and hero worship in society. Marx was referencing this in his statement, extolling his own humility, but it did not have anywhere near the modern connotation. The word cult itself is an interesting study in linguistics. In most languages, there is a word for sects or small religious groups. The Oxford Dictionary defines a sect as, quote, a group of people with somewhat different religious beliefs, typically regarded as heretical, from those of a larger group to which they belong. While most forms of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are considered to be religions, small outlier groups with interpretations of the faith whose views are dramatically at odds with others, perhaps recognizing an additional prophet or messianic figure, or having a dramatically different interpretation of holy texts, are considered to be sects. In Islam, for example, the various schools of Sunni and Shia are the prevailing versions of the religion. However, Alawites, Yazidis, and Druze are considered to be sects because their views about the faith are so strongly at odds with what most Sunnis and Shias believe, and their practices are wildly different as well. Alawites do not pray in mosques because Imam Ali was killed in a mosque. Yazidism incorporates elements of ancient Iranian religion into Abrahamic traditions and speaks of 7 specific angels assigned to guard the earth. These beliefs are so divergent from what the world knows to be Islam that they are considered to be a sect. Christianity is generally divided into Roman Catholics, Protestants, and Eastern Orthodox believers. While some fundamentalists will maintain they are not Protestants, their roots theologically stem from Europeans who rejected the Vatican after the Reformation. In addition to Orthodox, Protestants, or groups of with Protestant roots and Catholics, there are some groups such as the Latter-day Saints. The followers of Joseph Smith in the United States maintained that he was a latter-day prophet of God and adopted the Book of Mormon as a holy book alongside the Bible. This put them significantly at odds with the rest of Protestant Christianity. As such, they were labeled a sect. Jehovah's Witnesses, who reject the use of the cross, considering it to be a pagan symbol, and vehemently reject the concept of an afterlife, are similarly regarded. The word cult in the English language generally had this theological connotation until the 1950s. It was a synonym for sect and referred to an outlier religious community with beliefs deemed to be dramatically deviant or in opposition to the prevailing interpretation of the faith. The Eastern Orthodox churches and some Protestant fundamentalists used the term somewhat differently, considering all interpretations of the faith which they considered deviant to be cults. Baptists and Orthodox believers may call the Roman Catholic Church or the Methodist Church a cult because they consider it to be out of step with the Bible, not using the term in relation to the faith's size or relative deviance of its practices from the norm. The word cult, a theological term that referred to a deviant religion, was also used as a slur in other contexts. If a group of people were considered overly fanatical in embracing an artist or a musician or a cultural figure, their fans might derogatorily be called a cult. If a group of people held on to a certain philosophical concept in a way others deemed to be extreme, the cult of reason, the cult of modernity, this was a kind of hyperbolic insult, comparing those deemed overly fanatical or loyal to something as being similar to a religious sect. It was not until Khrushchev's 1956 speech that the term cult of personality took on its contemporary meaning, referring to how Marxist-Leninist governments glorified their leaders. Khrushchev's speech also set the stage for the word cult itself to take on a new meaning in U.S. discourse. In 1951, Western media thoroughly promoted a book called The True Believer, Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movements, written by Eric Hoffer. U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower quoted the book so much that Look magazine profiled Hoffer as, quote, Ike's favorite author. Bertrand Russell also embraced the book, as did U.S. President Harry Truman. The text is an early example of what became a very common theme in post-war liberal scholarship and propaganda, equating Nazi Germany with the Soviet Union and seeing them both as examples of dangerous groupthink. This had been done slightly during the 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, with Time magazine referring to, quote, communazis. However, Eric Hoffer's book was a study in the psychology of those who join mass movements and what drives them, presenting mass movements as inherently dangerous in and of themselves, regardless of their beliefs. Hoffer tells how the new poor are the most likely converts to a mass movement, and also warns that it is in mass movements that, quote, misfits and, quote, talentless people can rise into prominence. Hoffer warns that a mass movement's, quote, chief preoccupation is to foster, perfect, and perpetuate a facility for united action and self-sacrifice. Hoffer argues that mass movements are generally unable to head anywhere but toward mass bloodshed and persecution, though he claims certain laughable exceptions, revealing his pro-Western bias. Quote, there are, of course, rare leaders such as Lincoln, Gandhi, even FDR, Churchill, and Nehru. They do not hesitate to harness man's hungers and fears to wield a following and make it zealous unto death in the service of a holy cause. But unlike Hitler, Stalin, or even Luther and Calvin, they are not tempted to use the slime of frustrated souls as mortar in building a new world. They know no one can be honorable unless he honors mankind. The unstated dangers of mass movements, in Eric Hoffer's assessment, seem to be that they upset a supposedly correct natural order. According to Hoffer, mass movements drive people to sacrifice themselves for a higher purpose, enable people he deems to be redundant into prominence, and create unnecessary societal unrest leading to wars, atrocities, and man's inhumanity to man. Hoffer's assessment seems to hint that if these men of words and fault-finding intellectuals were kept from their agitation, society would move forward in tranquility. However, social conditions in which a layer of newly poor people are created results in creating an audience with an appetite for agitation and recruitment, allowing these misfits who feel they have been unjustly excluded to take the lead and steer the nation toward disaster. Hoffer spends a lot of time arguing that mass movements are rooted in avoiding personal responsibility by blaming society for one's own shortcomings or failures, a pretty common critique of socialism and communism that he extends to throw at nationalists and advocates of ethnic bigotry as well. This line of thinking that presents the world as fair and normal until some kind of authoritarian mass movement meddles with society very much parallels a much more recent Western academic trope called democratic regression or democratic backsliding. Various American political scientists describe the election of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and Vladimir Putin in Russia as steps away from democracy, despite the obvious popular mandate that these leaders have. U.S. political scientist Larry Diamond best articulated these sentiments in his 2019 Wall Street Journal article entitled The Global Crisis of Democracy. He wrote, quote, in one country after another, elected leaders have gradually attacked the deep tissue of democracy, the independence of the courts, the business community, the media, civil society, universities, and sensitive state institutions like civil service, intelligence agencies, and the police. Whether the agent of destruction is a right-wing nationalist like Vladimir Putin in Russia or a Bolivarian socialist like Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, the effect is the same. The structures and norms of democracy are eviscerated one by one until all that is left is a hollow shell. In the mindset of Larry Diamond, when the business community of Russia was cooperating with Western looting under Yeltsin in the 1990s, when the Russian media was echoing the Western talking points, when US-funded NGOs dominated civil society, when the police and intelligence agencies were powerless to stop what Andre Gunder Frank called economic genocide as the country was being devastated with mass unemployment, this was merely an expression of independence. A setup that serves the interests of Wall Street and the globalist imperialist system is just the healthy, expected, naturally occurring norm. However, when the business community, the intelligence agencies, the police, the courts, the universities began to be directed differently with the rise of Putin, suddenly, quote, the norms of democracy were being eviscerated. The popular mandate for such changes is almost irrelevant somehow. And the same goes for Venezuela, according to Diamond's analysis. When the country's military and intelligence agencies were directed by the United States, when its police broke strikes and disappeared leftist students, when its business community was dominated by Western monopolies, this was all healthy independence. Changing all of this, moving toward Bolivarian socialism, according to Diamond, left democracy as a hollow shell. In the bias of liberals, as long as the, quote, natural superiors who happen to have all the money and dominate the world economy are not interfered with, this is called democracy. If the state emerges, even with a popular mandate, and seeks to alter this setup, it is democratic regression. Eric Hoffer's text became a favorite of Cold War academics, but it long predated Khrushchev's 1956 tirade against Stalin. This shows that a narrative was already in the works long before Khrushchev opened his mouth. Another popular anti-communist screed that predates the secret speech was entitled The God That Failed. Richard Crossman, a high-ranking member of the British Labour Party and an outspoken Zionist, is credited with having conceived of the widely circulated text that received backing from the CIA, according to Joel Whitney's book, Finks, How the CIA Tricked the World's Greatest Writers. The book compiled the testimonies of 6 prominent writers who were once members of communist parties and admirers of Stalin during the 1930s. They tell their story of being in the communist movement and seeing it as an authoritarian disappointment, a corrupt scheme set up to serve the interests of Stalin and the Soviet government rather than achieve its stated goals. Richard Wright focused on how Black Americans and their struggles had been hijacked to serve Soviet aims. Arthur Kessler focused on a kind of top-down thinking and culture of obedience within the German communist movement during the early 1930s prior to the rise of Hitler. The essays all focus on communism being some kind of new version of Christianity that failed to deliver the promised heaven on earth. The book highlights cases of bureaucratic control over artistic work and manipulation of political causes to serve foreign policy from the Soviet Union. Communism, especially at this time, was an atheistic movement promoting dialectical materialism and rejecting all notions of spirituality. Yet, just as Eric Hoffer had compared it with Christianity's earliest years and shown it as an example of manipulative messianic figures enacting their grievances against society, a widely circulated testimony of ex-communists was speaking of communism as a, quote, God that failed, i.e., a false religion or a cult. The themes found in The True Believer and The God That Failed represented a much bigger trend happening behind the scenes. An article from Michael Warner can be found on the CIA's website in a section called the Center for the Study of Intelligence. The piece describes the Congress for Cultural Freedom program as one of the agency's most successful operations. The article tells how, in 1949, the Soviet Union was able to sponsor the Waldorf Peace Conference, attended by 800 of America's brightest writers, composers, scientists, actors, and intellectuals. It describes with frustration how so many respected individuals had been recruited into an alliance with Stalin. It then tells how the CIA launched its own program to covertly fund liberal activists and writers and nudge them away from communism. The article begins with a quote from Trotskyite college professor Sidney Hook, quote, "Give me $100 million and 1,000 dedicated people, and I will guarantee to generate such a wave of democratic unrest among the masses, yes, even among the soldiers of Stalin's own empire, that all his problems for a long period of time will come to be internal. I can find the people." During the 1950s, the CIA began funding Partisan Review, Encounter, Der Monat, and Paris Review, among other cultural magazines, along with the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller think tanks. These publications facilitated a burst of liberal criticism of McCarthyism, U.S. society, and Cold War conformity that flowed primarily into academic and cultural institutions. The primary source of the, quote, talent of the Congress for Cultural Freedom was Trotskyism, the renegade brand of communism that claimed lineage to Marx and Lenin, but rejected Stalin and the Soviet government. Irving Kristol, a member of Max Shachtman's Workers' Party, was selected to be the official leader of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Irving Howe, another Trotskyite, became an outspoken writer who specialized in topics related to Marxist theory. Mary McCarthy, Hannah Arendt, Susan Sontag, and many others who would go on to be, quote, big names among the left and the right in American discourse, got their start with a covert boost from the CIA. James Baldwin, an African-American writer who spoke to the experience of Black Americans but was vehemently anti-communist, was made famous by Paris Review. Ralph Ellison's anti-racist novel, Invisible Man, which tells of the Black experience but also demonizes the Communist Party, was popularized. Part of the reason Joe McCarthy and to some extent J. Edgar Hoover accused the CIA of being communist was because of the Congress for Cultural Freedom program. The Trotskyites, who held a seething hatred for the Soviet Union and worked tirelessly to smear Lillian Hellman and Albert Einstein and anyone else with ties to the Soviet Union, were still Marxists in their eyes for the hard right wing. Funding them was unacceptable. However, with the decline of McCarthyism, the nature of anti-communism shifted. The narratives flowing from the Congress for Cultural Freedom program became more and more widespread, and traditional religious and patriotic opposition to godless un-American communism became secondary to a new narrative. As far as Joe McCarthy and the John Birch Society were concerned, communism was a godless ideology that sought to destroy Christianity and the traditional family and create a violent revolution. It needed to be violently suppressed, and anything that sounded like communism needed to be seen with suspicion. However, to Hannah Arendt and Susan Sontag, communism was totalitarian, just another variant of the dangerous tendency of human beings to form mass movements that suppress individual rights. In fact, like Eric Hoffer had before, and like the CIA-sponsored book, The God That Failed, the liberal anti-communists often compared communism to Christianity. Their message echoed the words of Nietzsche long before the Russian Revolution. Quote, Let us not underestimate the destiny that has crept all the way from Christianity into politics. Today, nobody has any longer the courage of special rights or rights of command or a sense of respect towards oneself and one's peers, a pathos of distance. Our politics are sick through this absence of courage. The fib of equality of souls undermined the aristocratic outlook in the most insidious way. And while faith in the prerogative of the most will make revolutions, it is Christianity, let there be no mistake about it, and it is Christian judgments that turn every revolution into mere crime and bloodshed. Christianity is a revolt of all groveling creatures against that which has stature. The gospel of the lowly makes for lowliness. Like Hofer, Nietzsche equated communism with Christianity rather than condemning its atheism. In a view highlighted by George Lukács in his work on philosophical irrationalism, communism was seen as an example of inferior people gathering in mass and displacing their natural superiors. The real danger, according to Nietzsche, Hofer, and adherents of this growing school of thought, was not communism itself, but the masses of people who could be mobilized and empowered by it. Figures like Stalin or Joe McCarthy were seen as dangerous because they captured popular sentiments and used them to threaten the freedom of intellectuals. Irving Kristol, the Trotskyite, who got the job of running the Congress for Cultural Freedom for the CIA, eventually became one of the primary intellectual voices of neoconservatism. His New York Times obituary told of how he left socialism for the right wing based on his experiences in the military. Quote, drafted into the army with a number of Midwesterners who were street tough and often anti-Semitic, he found himself shedding his youthful radical optimism. I can't build socialism with these people, he concluded. They'll probably take it over and make a racket out of it. In his opinion, his fellow GIs were inclined to loot, rape, and murder, and only army discipline held them in check. It was a perception about human nature that would stay with him for the rest of his life, creating a tension with his alternative view that ordinary people were to be trusted more than intellectuals to do the right thing. Kristol was very close to the philosophical academic Leo Strauss, whose book, Persecution and the Art of Writing, told of how all the great philosophers of history had written in code to avoid persecution from the inferior rabble who might mobilize them for their intellectual nonconformity. Mobilize against them for their intellectual nonconformity. The Khrushchev secret speech contemplated the Khrushchev secret speech complemented an already existing narrative that had contempt for humanity itself. If one reads carefully the works of Cold War liberals like Hannah Arendt, Susan Sontag, and eventually Leo Strauss, the danger of, quote, cult of personality was not the dictator, cult leader, or would-be messiah, but rather the layers of newly poor and lowly ones who were impassioned by their message and joined their ranks. Cult of personality, or mass movements, or religions are seen as dangerous because they are vehicles for mobilizing and unleashing people. When one listens to the words of Tatiana Fedorova, interviewed by PBS, describing the way Stalin mobilized her generation to build and construct, one can hear a nearly overtly religious tone. We wanted to do something with our own hands, to glorify our country, not just with words, but with deeds, and we did it. We built the metro, we built the Magnitogorsk, we built the railways. We did it all with such comradeship, enthusiasm, and happiness. And if today I could live again, despite all the big difficulties, I would have done the same thing again. Stalin set a task, build this or build that, and thanks to the fact that people trusted him and this enthusiasm of young people, it was possible. Remember, we were illiterate. We lived in virtual darkness. We wore birch bark shoes. Even now, it's like something out of a fairy tale. It was one of the most difficult times to build this country. To build these great construction sites would only be possible through unity, and the unity of the people and the love of their people for their idol. Susan Sontag, the CIA-funded new leftist intellectual, considered communism to be the most successful form of fascism. In her widely read essay, Fascinating Fascism, she described what she considered to be the fascist aesthetic. She wrote, "It is generally thought that National Socialism stands only for brutishness and terror, but this is not true. National Socialism, more broadly fascism, also stands for an ideal, or rather ideals, ideal of life as art, the cult of beauty, the fetishism of courage, the dissolution of alienation in the ecstatic feelings of community, the family of man. Although Nuba are black, not Aryan, Riefenstahl's portrait of them evokes some layer of larger themes of Nazi ideology. The incorruptible and the defiled, the physical and the mental, the joyful and the critical, extravagant effort and endurance of pain, masses of groups of people, turning people into things, the multiplication of things and grouping of people, things around an all-powerful hypnotic figure or force. The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transactions between mighty forces and their puppets, uniformly garbed and shown in swelling numbers. Its choreography alternates between ceaseless motions and congealed static, virile posing. In both fascist and communist politics, the will is staged publicly in the drama of leader and chorus." The kind of spiritual energy that Stalin had cultivated to build up the Soviet Union and mobilize it to defeat the Nazis had much deeper roots than merely Marxism-Leninism. Opposition and inoculation against this kind of energy is now the obsession of the Western world, and Khrushchevism refers to a mindset that has been created to make us all be in constant guard against it. What made this new form of anti-populist leftism that arose after the fall of Joe McCarthy so effective is that it taps into the very feelings that many of the very people drawn to communism can strongly relate to. Communism has long been attractive to intellectual nonconformists, those who are likely to question what they are told and point to the injustices of society. A feeling that the masses are sheep who go along with the intolerable is a sentiment that hits home with many such people. It is worth noting that in the context of post-war economic expansion, people were not joining communist groups to participate in bread riots or labor struggles, but out of intellectual curiosity. While people joined communist groups during the Great Depression out of economic necessity, during the post-war boom, communism in the West attracted primarily those who asked deeper questions and were attracted by an intellectual basis, on an intellectual basis. Such people had a dramatic streak of nonconformity, and anti-populism could already be found within their souls. Stalin himself seems to have struggled with these very feelings in his youth as a revolutionary organizer and seminary school dropout in Georgia. His poem, published in 1895, invokes the crucifixion of Jesus and the execution of Socrates via hemlock to express frustrated sadness of the enlightened artist and thinker who sees no enthusiasm for truth among the masses. This is a poem that the young Joseph Vissarionovich Zhugashvili published at the age of 17. He knocked on the strangers' doors, going from house to house with an oaken panduri and a simple song of his. But in his song, pure as the sun's own gleam, resounded a truth profound, resounded a lofty dream. Hearts that had turned to stone were made to beat once more. In many houses he'd rouse a mind that slumbered in the deepest murk. But instead of the laurels he'd earned, the people of his land fed the outcast poison, placing a cup in his hand. They told him, damned one, you must drink it, drain the cup dry. Your soul is foreign to us. We prefer to live a lie. Another aspect of anti-communism during the 1950s that significantly contributed to the rise of anti-totalitarianism was fear of brainwashing, popularized during the Korean War and its aftermath. Poisoner-in-Chief Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control, a book written by award-winning journalist Stephen Kinzer, explains, quote, Americans should have been able to celebrate the release of 7,200 soldiers from communist prisons after an armistice ended the fighting in Korea in July of 1953. Instead, they recoiled in shock. Many prisoners, it turned out, had written statements opposing the United States or praising communism. Some had confessed to committing crimes. 21 chose to stay behind in North Korea or China. The Pentagon announced that they would be considered deserters and executed if found. John D. Marks, in his book on the same topic, The Search for the Manchurian Candidates, tells the same story. By the end of the Korean War, 70% of the 7,190 U.S. prisoners held in China had either made confessions or signed petitions calling for an end to the American war in Asia. 15% had collaborated fully with the Chinese, and only 5% had steadfastly resisted. Worse, an alarming number of prisoners stuck by their confessions after returning to the United States. They did not, as was expected, recant when they stepped onto U.S. soil. Puzzled and dismayed by the wholesale collapse of morale among POWs, American opinion leaders settled on Edwards' explanation. The Chinese had somehow brainwashed our boys. According to Kinzer, quote, Newsweek described them, the American POWs, as shifty-eyed and groveling, and said they had betrayed their country in exchange for better treatment because they had fallen in love with Asian women or because of the appeal of homosexualism. Several commentators warned they represented the weakening of American masculinity and a generation of pampered kids and mama's boys. Beyond the nation's spiritual decline and the feminization of its men, another theory emerged, brainwashing. Kinzer and Marks both describe how the CIA then set out to figure out the secrets of mind control for themselves. Two traumatic episodes, the testimony of Cardinal Mindszenty and his 1949 trial in Hungary, and the behavior of American prisoners in Korea several years later, convinced senior CIA officers that communists had discovered the keys to mind control. The stories they imbibed as children and adults made those fears seem real. Lost in the blurry borderland between fantasy and truth of mind control, they could not bring themselves to recognize the fantasy as the product of creative imagination. What the imagination could conceive, they believed the clandestine world would make real. MKUltra was an attempt to invent a new reality. John D. Marks revealed a particularly dark story to the public in the 1970s when the facts about MKUltra were uncovered by the Church Committee. The CIA built up its own elaborate brainwashing program, which, like the Chinese and Soviet versions, took its own special twist from our national character. It was a tiny replica of the Manhattan Project, grounded in the conviction that the keys to brainwashing lay in technology. Ex-agents told Marks about the cruelty they observed. That's why I couldn't even take reading the files after a while. I was sickened at seeing people take pleasure in other people's inadequacies. First of all, it was dumb. For all the money that went out, nothing ever came back. First, you'd check to see if you could destroy a man's marriage. If you could, that would be enough to put a lot of stress on an individual and break him down. Then you might start a minor rumor campaign against him, harass him constantly, bump his car in traffic. A lot of it is ridiculous, but it had a cumulative effect. Marx also wrote about how juvenile delinquent gangs became the target of experiments. With gang warfare, says an MK Ultra source, you tried to get some defectors in place who would like to modify some of the group's behavior and cool it. Now, getting a juvenile delinquent defector was motivationally not all that different from getting a Soviet one. John D. Marks reveals that very little success was found by the agency in truly altering people's beliefs against their will. By the time MK Ultra ended in 1963, agency researchers had found no foolproof way to brainwash another person. All experiments beyond a certain point always failed, says MK Ultra veteran, because the subject jerked himself back for some reason, or the subject got amnesiac or catatonic. Agency officials found through work like Cameron's that they could create vegetables, but such people served no operational purpose. People could be tortured into saying anything, but no science could guarantee that they would tell the truth. Across the Atlantic, British intelligence was involved in similar research, often sharing results with the Americans. A psychologist named William Sargent conducted all kinds of unethical experiments, which led to at least a few deaths. He kept patients drugged and asleep as he attempted to implant ideas into their minds, among other things. He published a book entitled The Mind Possessed in 1973, revealing that he had discovered about mind control and brainwashing. Quote, "It's not the mentally ill, but normal people who are the most susceptible to brainwashing. Conversion, possession, the crisis, or whatever you wish to call it, and who in their hundreds of thousands or millions fall readily under the spell of the demagogue or revivalist, the witch doctor, the pop group, the priest, the psychiatrist, or even, to the lesser degree, the propagandist or the advertiser. At the root of this all too common human experience is a state of heightened suggestibility, of openness to suggestion and exhortations." He goes on to describe how mind control is just an extension of the natural collectivism of the human species. Suggestibility is, in fact, one essential characteristic of being normal. A normal person is responsive to other people around him and cares what they think of him, and is readily open to their suggestion and influence. If the great majority of people were not normally suggestible, we could not live together in society at all. We could not collaborate in any undertaking. The originators of new ideas and the founders of new systems are rarely normal people. If they were, they would drop their new notions comparatively quickly in the face of the hostility of fellows. The schizophrenic and schizoid thinker is the most immune to all outside influences dominating his ideas. His ideas come most often from inside himself, and may be the product of hallucinations, delusions, and other abnormal thought processes which he experiences and which he tries to explain on the basis of further delusional thinking. During the war, schizophrenics were rarely upset by bombing, for instance, being far too preoccupied with their own inner turmoils and worries. Sargent observed that inducing stress can be key in creating a, quote, conversion. Persons of hysterical temperament are highly suggestible. Hysterical behavior is most commonly the result of normal people breaking down under severe stress, as we have seen again and again during the war. Faith healing and spirit possession rarely happen in a calm, rational atmosphere, as every witch doctor and faith healer knows all too well. Emotions must be aroused for success to be obtained. John D. Marks' book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, gives one very revealing discovery that U.S. intelligence made about LSD. The CIA veteran describes all the colors of the rainbow growing out of the cracks of the sidewalk. He had always disliked the cracks as a sign of imperfection, but suddenly the crack became natural stress lines that measured the vibrations of the universe. The CIA official states, "You tend to have a more global view of things. I found it awfully hard when stoned to maintain the notion I am a U.S. citizen, my country right or wrong. You tend to have these good higher feelings. You're more open to the brotherhood of man idea. You're more susceptible to the seamy sides of your own society." I think that's exactly what happened during the 1960s. But it didn't make people more communist. It just made them less inclined to identify with the United States. They took a plague on both your houses position. And this matched what had taken place in Korea. The GIs who had been brainwashed by the communists had been the most conforming, the most limited in their knowledge, and the true believers who had never questioned standard U.S. narratives. All it took was for them to be shown to be placed under a huge amount of stress, shown U.S. atrocities during the war, along with perhaps the horror of lynching and the ugly realities of U.S. society. In conditions of a POW prison, they would then flip and become communists. However, those GIs who had a shades of gray perspective, had some cynicism about U.S. society, and were some degree or other aware of the arguments in favor of the communist perspective, were far less likely to change. With this understanding of what CIA research into mind control was able to discover, we can understand why Cold War anti-communism shifted from seeking to create fanatical McCarthyists to creating skeptical liberals who equated all mass movements and were on the lookout for, quote, messianic figures who were actually self-serving demagogues. In fighting against the Soviet Union, the imperialists were not battling against Stalin or even communism. They were battling the spiritual power described by Tatiana Fedorova. They were battling the passion and belief in truth that communists often fomented, as did the leaders of other mass movements. Khrushchev's warning about the cult of personality was utilized for the purpose of replacing self-sacrifice, passion, and dedication that one found in true believers with the cynicism of those who would not become dedicated fighters for any cause, communist or otherwise. The U.S. intelligence agencies no longer sought to create fanatical anti-communists, but instead to induce lassitude. Lassitude is defined as a state of physical or mental weariness, a lack of energy by the Oxford English Dictionary. Those pumped full of cynicism, not against Stalin, but against leaders and messianic figures, not against communism, but against totalitarian mass movements, were sure to never be brainwashed by the Reds. Spreading feelings of lassitude throughout society was an effective mechanism for preventing mass movements of any kind from threatening the power structure, reducing people to a plague on both your houses perspective, without passion or loyalty, seems to be the primary mechanism of social control in our times. Khrushchevism is a big part of it. It is very difficult to build an organization in our times because the Khrushchevist mindset of "it's a cookbook" has been so widely inculcated. People are groomed and cultivated to have phobias about joining any kind of political movement other than an internet hashtag. Furthermore, the notion that the best kind of activism one can engage in is exposing or tearing down someone else with a similar belief is also widespread. It takes real strength of character to stay on the revolutionary road. One must go into organizing prepared to fight against the massive psychological operation aimed at demoralizing and atomizing the population. The problem must be named and called out, and that is the purpose of this book. And that was chapter 2 of my book, Khrushchevism, A Study in Psychological Warfare. So glad that I read that to you. We'll keep reading. There's a few more chapters. We'll do it, here night after night. So names and locations, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. Nico in Los Angeles County, Penny in Minnesota, Jenny in Cincinnati, JT24 in Mississippi, Deha in Seattle, Brooklyn in the house from Boston, Philip High, Jacob in Wisconsin, Alex in Brazil, Ryan in Kansas City, Luca in Singapore, Patch in Arizona, John McPeace in Chicago, Courtney in Virginia, Alyssa in Virginia, Unimanoid in Woodland, California, Nick in Tampa, Missouri in the Ozarks, Gabby in Chicago. Woo! Gabby. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Colin in Greensboro. Phil Sang in Miami. Utica, New York. Unanimous. Sorry, my thumb is too big. Sarah in Oregon. Go and subscribe to Sarah on Twitter. She does great stuff on Twitter. Sarah Jackman in Oregon. She does good stuff. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Dan in LA. Won't you please come to Los Angeles and Chicago? CPI in the house. Yes, we are in the house. I'm headed to LA May 24th. I'm headed to Chicago this summer. We're doing great things in CPI. We are pioneering, right? David Fox, who's going to be a speaker at our convention, by the way. I am so excited for David Fox. He's going to be giving a great presentation about the labor movement in Australia. That is so awesome. And, I am so excited. Look, folks, we are blazing trail. We are blazing new ground in CPI. And actually, this book is part of it, right? Because we're naming the psychological warfare mechanism that they have used to break apart anti-imperialist groups. We're naming that mechanism, and we've got a book all about it. We've got a book all about it. This is really, really awesome what we are doing. We have an understanding of what Khrushchevism is and how they have trained us all, and we're actively fighting against it. We are years ahead of the imitators and the phonies. And we are blazing trail, and we are marching ahead. And it's very, very exciting. It's really, really great what we are doing with CPI. And so now a number of people have sent Rumble rants. If you have a question, I'll put it in the chat again. If you have a question that you would like me to answer, you can send it via Rumble rant, or you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22. Those are the two ways that you can send your questions. A number of people have sent their questions, so we're going to answer the people's questions, right? The people ask a question, and the people get an answer. That's how it goes. First question, John McPeace. Just the fact that Russia and the United States are talking to each other again makes Earth 1,000% safer than it was during Biden's term. And you are absolutely right about that, John. Absolutely right. And, people want to just, they have this, they want Trump to be a good guy, and Trump is doing things that are wrong. And so they're like, Trump is a bad guy. And so it's all pointless. And it's like, no, that's not how the real world works. It's about the balance of forces. And Trump is negotiating with the balance of forces. And that's the situation that we're in. And it's more complicated than that, right? And that we are so much safer because the USA is talking to Russia. And I really would like this war to end. I really, really would like this war to end. Yeah. Leo Messi says Roy Singham warrants some explanation. I don't know what more to say about it. I guess Roy Singham is a man of Indian descent who grew up in Detroit and was close to the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, which I've talked about, which was an organization of black auto workers who were Maoist communists that was quite popular. In my writing on the history, I recently published as a standalone piece my history of the new communist movement of the 70s. And in the textbook, I talk about Detroit was one of the only places where the new communist movement, the NCM of the 1970s, really took hold, really, gained a following and had enough popularity to really have influence and to like influence elections and et cetera. And in Detroit, in the new communist movement, the one of the main groups was called Drum, and it was a group of auto workers who were communists. They eventually formed the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And I guess Roy Singham was a teenager of Indian descent, a man of color, and race was a really big factor. And this was a group of black Maoists that were very popular in Detroit, and he was living in the Detroit area, and he was around that. And then he grew up, and he just became a tech millionaire. I forget what his company is. He has some tech millionaire company. It's highly invested in China, and now he dishes out cash to to Code Pink, to the People's Forum, to the Tricontinental Institute of Vijay Prashad. And I mean, Code Pink plays a good role, I think. Code Pink is actually, I don't agree with everything that they do. They do lean pretty liberal, but they're not PSL. But the Tricontinental Institute and Vijay Prashad and PSL play a very negative role. And they're all being funded by Roy Singham. The only reason we really know Roy Singham's name, there's been rumors, right? There were rumors about a billionaire who was funding PSL and paying for the People's Forum and stuff. There were rumors about it, but it wasn't proven until, it was the Zionists, right? Because, the People's Forum is heavily involved in protesting Israel. And so it was Fox News and the pro-Israel folks that revealed, they came out and they said, well, Roy Singham is paying for all of this. And the way they frame it is they say Roy Singham is a Chinese agent, and that he's doing this on behalf of the Chinese government, and that this is a big Chinese conspiracy. Well, that's bull honking, right? Roy Singham's not a Chinese agent. Roy Singham is not a Chinese agent. I honestly think Roy Singham is connected with the American deep state, and I'll tell you why. I will tell you why. When the People's Forum first opened up, right, before it was controlled by the PSL, randomly on 38th Street in New York City, this organization called this new building, it's supposed to be this big socialist communist building, opens up in New York City. And this was a while back. We're talking like 2015. It might have been earlier than that. At that point, we didn't have CPI. CPI didn't exist. But Students and Youth for a New America was our organization. We sent people to go there, to their events, to hand out leaflets. And they immediately told us we weren't allowed. And they immediately ran over. You are not allowed to do that here. It was very, very odd, very weird. And we thought it was weird. They would let every other communist group hand out stuff, but they immediately, and they knew me by name. They would say, is that Caleb Maupin's group, the RT guy who met with Dugan? No, you can't do that here. And this was before I got canceled on the internet for Dugan. This is before I was even doing YouTube streams. And they knew nobody who is connected to RT can do anything here. And that is really sketch. And every time we would go there and try to hand out leaflets, they would immediately stop us. They wouldn't stop anybody else. And then they would give us, you can't, if you want to pass out leaflets here, you have to talk to, and they would give us this phone number that didn't work. And they'd say, you have to call this phone number. And the phone number didn't work. It was very suspicious. Very, very, very suspicious. But what it was is I was the RT reporter at that time, and the FBI knows that, and the CIA knows that, and the People's Forum, which was being paid for by Roy Singham, had some kind of agreement that, yeah, we'll let some stupid Trotskyite group, but that Caleb guy, he reports for, and the People's Forum is excessively woke, right? If the People's Forum loves China, right? Do they have gay marriage in China? Do they have gay marriage in China? I don't think so. So why is it in the People's Forum that if you're against gay marriage, you're not welcome? If they're agents of China, China doesn't have gay marriage. So if you're against, gay marriage, if they were Chinese agents, they wouldn't have a problem with you. But yet the People's Forum, if you're against gay marriage, you're not welcome at the People's Forum. That right there tells you something. And if you look at what the People's Forum is doing, they are not They are not agents of China. They are agents of woke, but they are trying to give the impression that woke and communist, anti-imperialist governments walk hand in hand, which is bullshit. Woke and anti-imperialist governments do not walk hand in hand. George Soros is the guy who funds woke, and George Soros is the guy who overthrows communist governments. All right? George Soros, the guy who and right-wingers are dumb about this too. They're all like, oh, George Soros is a communist. No, George Soros is an anti-communist. He's a Hungarian billionaire who funded the protests that brought down the Eastern Bloc in 1989. And George Soros hates China more than anybody. And George Soros is the guy who's doing all the woke stuff. But right-wing conservatives, because George Soros has criticized capitalism or, said this or that. He's not a conservative. He's not a Republican. He's not a free market libertarian. He must be a communist, right? And, People's Forum and Roy Singham are working very, very hard to reinforce that, right? If you go, Max Blumenthal pointed out that there are members of Congress that are vehemently anti-transgender that were on the board overseeing USAID and were funding transgender activism in other countries. Why? Because it's disruptive, because it plays a disruptive role. It creates division. You're attacking traditional culture. You're deconstructing gender. You're making parents afraid that their kids might get surgery. It plays a disruptive role. The transgender obsession and transgender education and inserting that into a very traditional society creates confusion, and that allows them to dominate. And these very conservative anti-trans Republicans were happy to pay for trans education in Muslim countries, happy to pay for trans education in South America, because it plays a disruptive role. And that woke is a tool of imperialism. Woke, George Soros, the LGBT obsession. I'm not against LGBT people. Let me just say that. If you want to be gay, that's your business. If you want to be gay, I think you should have the right to be who you are. Your marriage, your lifestyle is none of my goddamn business, okay? And nobody's sex life, as long as it's with consenting adults, is any of my goddamn business. That's not the point. My point is that the color revolution apparatus, the rainbow flag, foundation money and all of that is imperialism. However, that's what the People's Forum is. And if you go to any anti-imperialist country, you go to China, they know that the people funding gay rights activism in China are trying to disrupt China. If you go to China, they know that George Soros is their enemy and not their friend. But if you go to the People's Forum and you say George Soros is bad, they say, you're anti-Semitic. Oh, you hate him because you're a Nazi for Trump, and you hate him because he's a Jew. That's what they say to you, right? If you go to People's Forum and say, should we really be promoting transgender? They say, oh my God, you're spreading right-wing bigotry. You must be a Trump. The People's Forum is woke, and woke is the enemy of China. So the idea that the People's Forum works for China does not compute. The People's Forum is, I believe it's a lot like what was done by the liberal intellectuals during the time of the fall of the Soviet Union, right? They want to cultivate a layer of people in the Chinese government to be woke to eventually destabilize China and bring it down. That's what they're trying to do. And the way to do that is to create a layer of woke people who pretend, or at least seem, to be sympathetic to communism, right? If you go to China and you're like, I'm against the Communist Party, I'm against China, people are going to be like, get out of here. But if you're like, oh, I love the Communist Party, and I also love George Soros, and I also love Kamala Harris, don't you? It's a Trojan horse, so to speak. And that's what the People's Forum is. And the fact that they have been nothing but hostile to me long before I was on the shit list of most communists, long before people even knew who I was, long before this YouTube channel really got going. But they immediately, no, that guy's not here. Look, weird shit happens, right? Years ago, I think I've posted the video on this channel. I was walking through Brookfield Mall randomly to go meet a friend for lunch, right? Very rarely I'll go to Brookfield Mall and have a sandwich with a friend of mine. It's a nice mall, right? In Lower Manhattan. It's a nice mall, right? There's a movie theater. I don't know. It's like a thing I will do occasionally. I am a real person, mind you. I don't just exist on the internet. I do, other people in the chat can assure you I do really exist. I'm not a figment of your imagination. I'm not an AI creation. I do exist. And occasionally I will go to Brookfield Mall. So I'm walking through the Brookfield Mall, not for any political reason. I'm just walking to meet my friend. And in the Brookfield Mall, I see some dude, racist dude in a Trump hat with a Confederate flag. And he's surrounded by a group of people yelling at him. And I thought, oh, this is weird. This is news. So I pulled out my phone. And there's a group of Black Americans yelling at this white dude in a Trump hat and a Confederate flag standing in the middle of the mall. And I figured, okay, I'll film this, right? I mean, I'm on social media, and this looks like I just walked by a news event. I pull out my camera and I film this. So what happens? One of the people, and I think it's in the video, one of the people that was shouting at this guy with the Confederate flag turns and points to me and says, "Oh, we've got Putin here." And I thought, Putin? Like, what? And I wasn't wearing any RT badge. I wasn't even there for RT. I was just for a friend. "Oh, we've got Putin here." Look, those people that were surrounding that guy with the Confederate flag, they were woke liberal activists, and they have all been given, a list of people, and they know me by face. I think the video is on this channel if you want to dig, and they all said, "And Putin here," right? The people that are working for George Soros, the people that are working for our government, they all know who I am, right? And they have all been, and I'm just telling you, right? And RT loves China. You watch RT, they love China. China and Russia are very close. So why would the People's Forum that are supposedly Chinese agents hate me? Right? Because they're agents. They're just like those people that were shouting. They're part of the George Soros liberal apparatus. And that's why PSL has worked very, very hard to make the Palestine protests so anti-American and hostile to average Americans. And that's why, they've been so hostile to me and threaten me when I come to their rallies, is because they're agents, right? This is controlled opposition. They know what they are doing, right? They know what they're doing. And again, you can't make this up. On the one hand, right, they always say, "Oh, Caleb, you're not important. You're not important." Really? Because I went to Minneapolis to have a little, to drink, drink coffee and tea with a few people in Minneapolis and talk communism. And there were 15 people outside at 8 a.m. screaming, "Don't listen to him, cult." I think I'm important, right? And I mean, I continued. I am quite important. I am very, very important, right? And even though they've tried to conceal this YouTube channel and all of that, I'm quite important, and I realize it. And I wouldn't be getting the special treatment that I'm getting. Again, if I was not important, I'd be able to go to Minneapolis and have a workshop and there not be a huge crowd of protesters outside. If I was not important, if I was walking through the mall and I pulled out my phone and filmed, some people arguing with somebody about a Confederate flag, people wouldn't immediately point to me and shout, "Putin, Putin." I'm quite important. Right? I may not be well known. I'm not like a household name or anything like that, but the government knows who I am, right? The FBI knows who I am. These people know who I am, and they know that I'm the real deal, right? There's a lot of frauds and phonies on social media acting stupid, but I'm the real deal. I mean what I say, and they watch these streams, I'm sure, and I scare the living crap out of them. I'm not supposed to happen. I'll just tell you this. I am not supposed to happen. Right? Communism in America is supposed to be a hobby for rich kids. It's supposed to be a hobby for rich kid hipsters, right? And it's supposed to be a phase you go through in your 20s, and then you grow out of it. And you're not supposed to be interested in communism the way I am. You're supposed to be interested in communism in the way 15-year-old hipsters are. It's supposed to be a form of wokeism, right? I, on the other hand, I'm from a small town in Ohio, and I have learned the economics. I am pro-economic growth. I have returned to my Christian faith, and I understand the essence of anti-imperialism, and I've rejected anti-populism, and I'm building a real movement. I scare the bejesus out of them. This is what they're afraid of. I represent the coming triumph of illiberalism in America, and they're terrified of me. And yeah, you don't have to believe that. And I have no reason for you to believe that, but I'm just telling you, based on what I've experienced, I'm quite important. you know, and I mean, I've interviewed one head of state, the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I've spoken directly with another head of state, the Russian president. I spoke with Donald Trump, and he called me his favorite reporter. I confronted Tsai Ing-wen, the so-called president of Taiwan, on the street of New York City. I've done some shit. I've been some places and I've done some shit. Doesn't really matter. But there's a reason. Netflix, right? Here's a great example, right? And again, there's always a group of nasty people. You're not important, Caleb. Fine. You don't have to believe I'm important, but go and watch. If you have Netflix, there's a documentary on Netflix called How to Become a Dictator. That's what it's called. How to Become a Dictator. It's a Netflix documentary. My face is in that documentary multiple times. Multiple times in that documentary, they say, and then you assemble a mob, and then they show me. They show my face, and they show me standing outside the White House shouting, "You're a terrorist murderer," because I was at a demonstration. I was at a pro-Syrian government demonstration, and there was a woman there supporting ISIS, supporting the head choppers, supporting the Syrian rebels, and I shouted at her, "You are a terrorist murderer." And twice in this Netflix documentary, when they're trying to give the impression of an evil totalitarian mob, they cut to me standing in front of the White House shouting, "You are a terrorist murderer." Why are they trying to associate my face with evil in Netflix? Why? Right? I guess it's because I'm not important, right? I mean, I could go down the line. I could list so many examples of how important I am. And, and there will be a bunch. First of all, there are people who are obsessed with everything I do, monitor everything I do, are constantly trying to harass me, constantly harassing people who know me. I mean, I have been targeted like you wouldn't believe. And on the other hand, then the very same people who obsess with me and target me and protest little workshops I do in Minneapolis are the exact same people that will turn around and be like, "Oh, you think you're so important." Well, I mean, the evidence certainly speaks to that, but it doesn't really matter if I'm important or not. It really doesn't goddamn matter, right? It really doesn't matter, but you all are certainly making me important. And I mean, there are just example after example of things that seem to tell me I'm important. And the very same people who obsess with me and are constantly, imitating what I'm doing or commenting on it or whatever, the very same people that do that are the very same people that will then insist I'm not important. So, I mean, hey, if I'm not important, why are you watching right now? I mean, if you're one of those people watching right now who's like, "Oh my God, he thinks he's important." Well, if you're one of those people, why are you watching me? If I'm not important, you shouldn't be watching right now. Go watch something else. Go watch football or baseball or, go watch the grass grow or, I don't know, but you're watching me. So on some level, I am important. Even if you're hate watching me, even if you can't stand me, I'm important, and I mean, okay. What does that mean? Why does it matter that I'm important? Well, I'm talking about important stuff, right? And, first of all, I can be a bad person and still talk about important stuff, right? I mean, I mean, that's one thing, that like, I mean, if you want to believe that I am somehow a bad person, that doesn't in any way mean that what I am saying is false. Bad people do say true things. Hitler was a very, very awful person, but if Hitler said the sky is blue, that didn't make the sky red. The sky was still blue, right? And so you can character assassinate me all you want, but I'm still here. I'm still standing. I'm still live streaming. I'm still publishing books. Center for Political Innovation still exists, and we're still doing shit. And we're about to do the biggest event we've ever done. And, you can form, fake imitator groups if you want, and you can do this and you can do that. And you can, we're still here. We're still standing. We're still standing and we're getting a lot done. And, we have a lot to offer. So hate us all you want. Here we are. Here we are. Here we are. And we're the real deal. And it wouldn't be necessary to suppress us the way they do if we weren't important. If we weren't important, the government, in normal times, right? In normal times, the US government's approach toward dissent is that it's good for America. They say, look, we're such a tolerant society. We'll invade Iraq, but we'll let a few thousand people marched through the streets of New York with signs opposing the war because, look, that's how we are. If you are not threatened by the message, right? I mean, in a normal, healthy state of affairs for U.S. imperialism, I shouldn't matter, right? I mean, it shouldn't matter. They should just ignore me, right? I should just be, okay, yeah, you're always going to have one or two weirdos who like Putin, who like Russia. Yeah, whatever. That's not their response to me. Their response to me is very different. It's not just, oh, yeah, sure, people like Caleb exist, whatever. That's how free and open we are. We allow people like Caleb to exist. That's not their response. That is not their response. There is a desperation, a desperation to inoculate people against me, to isolate me on a personal level, to, everything, right? And the lengths they have gone to try and, stop me is about the strongest confirmation that I'm doing what is right. I know that this society that we live in is run by Satan, right? The devil rules this country. And look, as much as I love my country, I know we, the people of America, we don't rule it. This country is run by Satan, right? This world is run by Satan. Okay? That is just a fact. And if Satan is so obsessed with you that, you can't have a workshop in Minneapolis without 15, losers outside chanting about how you're a weird little guy, that means you're on God's side. That's what that says to me. So that tends to tell me that the work that I'm doing and the work that we are doing with the Center for Political Innovation is pretty darn important. And the more they demonize us and the more they smear us, the more attention we get. So we're just going to keep doing what we're doing and, just let people be silly. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. And we just keep going. And these are very difficult times. And Khrushchevism and liberal atomization are everywhere. And that's the point that I was making in the chapter that I just read you all. But anyway, let's keep going. Let's keep going. All right. I like your focus on the synthesis of ideas. This is Bonzo Beans on the synthesis of ideas and integration of society, not just being on the right side of the issue. Most in the alt media activist camp seem to be living in one idea of camps. Yeah, being alone and right, being all by yourself and right is worthless. I mean, it doesn't. When you're a teenager. Right? Maybe when you're a teenager, you might feel like, okay, I want to be right. I want to show that everyone else is wrong and I'm right. But what happens? So if everyone else is wrong and you're right, what happens? Do you win an award? No. Do you get a prize? No. Do you get a net? Maybe if you're right about the stock market in a way that everyone else is wrong about, you'll know what to invest and make some money. I don't know. I mean, I can think of circumstances where perhaps being right when everyone else is wrong could benefit you. But for the most part, if you know something that nobody else knows, if you are correct about something most people are wrong about, there's no payout. It accomplishes nothing. Right. Again, there are some rare circumstances where there may be some self-gain that you could rig for yourself. But aside from that, it doesn't mean anything. But there are many, many people I know and many, many people. The internet is full of people who are contented. Their one dream in life is to be right and to be able to point to the rest of society and say, you're wrong. And that's not a real goal. That doesn't accomplish anything. That does not accomplish anything for the most part. It's a very narcissistic way of being, right? So it's very individualist. It's very it's very much like, so you feel wronged by society. So what you are desperately longing for is not to change society, not to make society better, not to improve things, but just you want to be able to have the solid proof that society is wrong and you are right. And that's what you're looking for. Alternative media circles are flooded with people that's all they want. That's all they want. They want to make their own certificate that says I'm right and everyone else is wrong. And I'm telling you, as somebody who has spent my entire adult life, I'm 37 years old. I've been doing this for 18, 19 years. I've been doing activism. I've been doing anti-imperialism. I'm just telling you that you don't win anything. There's no that, you make that little certificate for yourself. I'm right. Everybody else is wrong. That's meaningless. That means nothing. That does not translate into any real changes in the real world. And that we, with CPI, the reason we're called the Center for Political Innovation, and the reason that we are doing mass outreach and the reason that we are changing is because we are not interested in doing that. We're not interested in doing that. We're not trying to sell you an identity with which you can isolate yourself from society. We're not trying to create a niche for which you can hide from your neighbors. We're trying to build a real movement that will nudge and change the course of history and build an anti-imperialist movement. That's what we're trying to do. And, there's a million ways to get stuck, and I could ramble about this all night, but I am not going to. I'm going to answer the next question. John McPeace says, anti-imperialist governments don't want America to fall. They want America to change. Amen. That is so true. That is absolutely the truth. Anti-imperialist governments do not want the United States to fall. They just want the United States to change. If the USA were to fall, like ancient Rome, the result would be destabilization and chaos all over the world, which is exactly what the anti-imperialist governments don't want, because that would spill into them. They would like a prosperous America that trades with them in a beneficial way. They would like an America that would win in a way that they would win. They want win-win cooperation. You listen to Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping and Danny Haiphong do not agree about what the future of the world is. Xi Jinping wants America to be prosperous, but trade with China in a prosperous way. And the right wing lies about this too. The right and the left, so many times I see the left and right repeat the same lie, right? I caught Steve Bannon lying about this. Steve Bannon, I watched it. I was furious. He was on C-SPAN talking about protectionism, and he said, the Chinese Communist Party at their Congress, I listened to Xi Jinping's speech, and he said there's an economic war with America, and we won. I looked up Xi Jinping's speech. There's not a single reference to the United States in the speech. At no point did Xi Jinping at the Chinese Communist Party's Congress get up and say, there was an economic war with the United States and we won. That was a lie. That was a lie. And in fact, China doesn't want to destroy the United States. They've said that over and over again. They want to trade with the United States. They want joint economic ventures. They don't want to destroy the United States. How would that benefit them? To have the wealthiest country in the world deteriorate into chaos and misery, and how would that benefit China? Right? China would like the United States to become more prosperous and stable in a way that would be to their benefit. Right? The wealthier Americans are, the more Chinese stuff we can buy. It's just, it's weird, but the American left, they think China wants to destroy America. They just think it's a good thing. And the American right, they think China wants to destroy America, and that's why they hate China. And both of them are wrong. And if you actually listen to what China says, and if you actually look at their economic programs, they want joint space exploration. Like, this is not correct, right? Alienated woke leftists want China to destroy America. Right-wingers think China wants to destroy America, but that's not what's going on. And it's just like, it's infuriating to me, right? And so it's like, there's a rule in America that you just have to hate China. And then there's a small minority of people, most communists hate China, but a small minority of people who call themselves communists who like China. But to be part of their club, you have to like China because you want to destroy America. When China says it doesn't want to destroy America, these are tough times. This is why we're so important. This is why we're important. We're the only people that talk about these ideas in a sensible way. Nobody has any sense right now. We are the only ones with basic common sense. We're the only ones that say, hey, we're against imperialism because we love America. You'd think that would be basic common sense. Hey, if you want to build a movement in America against imperialism, maybe we should try to convince the American people that imperialism is bad for them. You'd think that would be like basic, but nobody in America says that, because, you know, I mean, it's like, we're the only people with any common sense. Look, I said at our convention in Oregon, the last convention that we had, I said, some people think, and there are people who think that patriotism, our patriotism as CPI, that we have the American flag, we begin our events with the national anthem. Some people think our patriotism is contrived, right? They think it's like, oh, people think communism is against America, and so you're going to convince people that you like America. Oh, no, it's not like that at all. We actually love America. And I challenge you, if you're watching this, love America. You don't love the wars, don't love slavery, don't love the Pentagon. But if you're watching this, I want you to find something about Americanism and America that you love. For real. Not phony, not fake, not something you can tell people. I challenge you to find something in the American spirit that you can attach to, something that is identified with America that you can love. And if you can do that, then you can be a serious political figure in America. If you don't love America, you have no future in American politics. The only way you can love America, the only way you can have a future in American politics is if you love America. Right? So, love free speech. You know, love, you know, I love optimism and working hard and growth. That's a big part of the American dream. And that's what all the anti-imperialist countries want. All the countries that are breaking out of imperialism, that's what they want. Growth. And that's why America was formed, because the British Empire wanted to prevent us from growing. And that's what people from all over the world come here for. They want economic growth. And that's what the Chinese Communist Party is all about, economic growth. Growth is American. And growth is what the imperialists are trying to stop. With imperialism is about holding back development, stopping growth. And we want growth. There's nothing more American than that. The essence of anti-imperialism in our time is wanting growth, and that's what America is all about. America is the growth country. Again, there's a perfect storm. It's like there's a perfect storm at this point for someone to do the right thing and build a real anti-imperialist movement in America. And there's a bunch of jackasses running around trying to prevent that from happening. And I mean, it's like, there's never been a more perfect moment to do what we are trying to do, to build a movement for a society in America where the banks and the factories and the industries are organized to serve public good, not the profits of a few, to break America out of imperialism, to build a movement of working families fighting for justice. Now is the ideal time to do it, right? When I was a kid in the 90s, it wasn't like this, right? Things have really gotten harder, economically speaking, but the consciousness of the public has changed. We could build a real movement if somebody was courageous enough to actually do it. But no one's courageous enough to actually do it. There's just a bunch of people being jackasses. And so I have to do it. No one else is going to do it, right? No one else is going to do it. I talked about Noah's Ark, right? Noah got a vision from God, and he went out and he built an ark, and his neighbors thought he was crazy. But then the floodwaters came, and he had an ark, and you know, the floodwaters are here. The floodwaters are rising. CPI is building an ark, and yeah, people don't approve, but you know, the floodwaters are rising, and we're going to have an ark. And other people are going to have their Twitter page. And other people are going to have everyone in leftism thinking they're cool. And no, we don't have a vision from God. No angel visited me and told me this. I just used my understanding of the world economy and how this stuff works. I used my understanding of economics and world history. I understand the floodwaters are rising. We got to build an ark. We have got to build an ark. It's urgent. I try not to get urgent. I try to just focus on getting done what I can get done. But there is an element of urgency to it. The crisis is intensifying. You know, Trump being in office, as much as you might not think that, Trump being in office gives us political space, right? Kamala Harris and Joe Biden were actively making it illegal to do anti-imperialist work in this country, right? They went after the Uhuru movement. They went after Scott Ritter. And now that's been frozen because Trump feels threatened by that because of Russiagate and all of that. Trump feels like that, you know, outlawing friendliness to Russia, outlawing friendliness to China is a threat to him. And so he's frozen it. And that's good. And it looks like for the next 3 years, at least, it will be legal to build an anti-imperialist movement in America. Well, thank goodness for that. It should be legal. I mean, it should be, promoted because it's what's going to save this country. But I digress. All right. What's next? Also, Candace Owens cited Solzhenitsyn. Yeah, I've seen. Yeah, well, I saw that, and I mean, I would love to talk to Candace Owens. There's plenty we can talk about, and I would love to talk to Candace Owens, and set her straight on a few things. But, I mean, that clip went around of her saying what she said about the Soviet Union and stuff, and I mean, it's not accurate, right? I mean, there were not death camps for Christians in the Soviet Union. There were prison camps called gulags that people were put in. And a lot of people were put there who shouldn't have been there, especially in the late 1930s during the Great Terror. But the idea that people were put in there for being Christians, that's not true. People were, there was, suppression of the Russian Orthodox Church, and that was wrong. And Stalin brought back the Russian Orthodox Church, and that was a great thing. And it's a complicated thing, but there was horrendous persecution of Christians for sure. But they weren't rounding up Christians and putting them in death camps, which is what she said. That's an absurd thing to say. That's absurd. It's completely absurd. But hey, well, anyway, but anyway, oh, goodness gracious. Anyhow. All right. So, David Fox wants me to play, or was it David Fox or, oh, okay. All right. Yeah. John McPeace wants me to play David Rovick's All Saying the Internationale. People's Forum is like the Wuhan lab. People funded by the U.S. deep state, but blamed on China. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, they're blaming the People's Forum on China when they sound nothing like China, and their stated goals, are completely different from China's. But anyway, all right. So let's put David Rovick's on All Saying the Internationale. We'll put that on because it is a good David Rovick's piece, and I've never been hit with a copyright strike for playing our friend David Rovick's or anything like that. So, yeah, we'll put that on because David Rovick's is our friend. David Rovick's is a good guy, and David Rovick's has been targeted in the same way that I've been targeted. He's got some good videos about it too. Like, they've gone to his neighborhood and put up flyers against him, and he's a sincere person, right? He generally, believes in what he's saying. He's a real anti-imperialist. Actually, you can watch a lot of videos David Rovick's has made about how viciously they've targeted him for nothing, for just being an anti-imperialist, saying that he's a Holocaust-denying anti-Semite, which he is definitely not. He's Jewish. They've really targeted him, and it's the same woke anarchist, cancel culture crowd. And it's David Rovick's. I was a fan of David Rovick's. I'll tell you, the first time I ever went to Iran, I had David Rovick's songs about John Brown on my laptop. And I never thought in a million years I'd be friends with David Rovick's. But one thing led to another. And now David and Rovick's and we talk on the phone. I know David Rovick's. It's wild, right? I just thought he was just some anarchist folk singer, but he got canceled. I got canceled. He's a sincere person, and so am I. And here we are. And that's the weirdness, the strangeness of the times that we live in, right? Is that sincere people are standing together, right? He was from the anarchist school. I come out of ML, but I'm moving in a different direction. And we're innovationists. And that, there's a lot of people that I'm friends with now that I never thought I would be friends with. Never in a million years did I dream I would be friends with them. But one thing led to another, and here we are, right? It's very wild. There are people probably watching this stream right now who are like, yeah, Caleb, we never thought in a million years somebody like you would be friends with us. But there you go. Right? We're in a very strange time. And that's why, on some level, my Christian faith just comes into it. Right? Because I feel like there is a higher power that is guiding all of this, because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, there's just no way to explain it. Things are so out of whack. All the old political rules don't make any sense. But on that note, folks, on that note, we'll do the David Rovics. They all sang the Internationale.
Katarina Jakob, long before she took that name, was organizing workers in Hamburg just the same. Organizing beneath the flag of deepest red, a new dawn of peace and freedom clearly shining in her head. Katarina Jakob first was sent to jail when the trappings of democracy all began to fail. She was frequently arrested in and out of custody while her first husband was in hiding from the Nazis. Katarina Jakob was acquitted of a crime, but the Gestapo had the last word. They weren't finished with her this time. She was sent to Ravensbrück, a killing hunger at her side. She heard of the execution, how her second husband died. For Katarina Jakob, the end was close at hand. She was on a death march with a ragged, starving band, marching through a forest, being led by the SS. What would happen hours later seemed impossible to guess. When the sun came the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katarina Jakob thought about her children and the friends and comrades taking care of them, not knowing yet if any of them survived, not knowing that soon she'd see her daughters both alive. Katarina Jakob watched the German soldiers fleeing, streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them, she thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katarina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies as never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forest beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Yeah, that's some good David Rovics. That's some good stuff. But yeah. All right, folks. I generally tend to stream on Saturday nights. It's a big night for streaming, and that is tomorrow. So yeah. On that note, I will probably be ending this stream. I hope you all enjoyed Khrushchevism. I'm going to keep reading from it. It's an important text. Like I said, I continue to put out these little booklets of like shorter chapters of my bigger books. It's just something I can do in this time. And we've got a lot going on. We really do have a lot going on. There's a lot that we have to do in order to fill up that auditorium and have the anti-imperialist mega rally that we need to have on July 12th. It's not going to be easy, but I think we can do it. And I'm confident. And we have a good team of people. And the 7-day workshop is coming along. And, it's like one thing at a time. I make a list every day in my notebook, and I cross things out and I cross things out. And we're doing it. But hey, if you can help us out, that would be great. If you can be there, that would be even better. We've got a lot to do. There's a lot to do. A lot of people say to me, Caleb, why don't you just enjoy your life? Why don't you just, you have a nice paycheck and you have a good, why don't you just sit back? No, I believe in what I'm doing. Right. And that's always been the curse. When I was in school, a lot of times I was interested in the subject. When that has always been my curse, is that I care about this stuff. I really do. Right. And I'm not comfortable to just sit back and, okay, well, I'm fine. For me, I am very heavily invested in building the anti-imperialist movement this country needs. And so I'm going to keep doing it. Even if it causes me to have a few stressful days here and there. There's a lot that needs to happen between now and July, but it's going to be worth it. I'm looking forward to how amazing our event in July is going to be. It's going to be awesome. So we need you there. So sign up, be there. All right, folks, I've got to say goodnight because it is getting late and I'm streaming tomorrow night. So we'll be back. We'll be back as always. So Saturday night tends to be a big night. So I probably will stream tomorrow night. So here we go.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.